The story began when a little girl shed tears in the forest in the middle of the night. She remembered that her stepmother had slapped her, calling her incapable and resembling her mother. This little girl was the illegitimate child of Baron Berg. People speculated about the face of the little girl, claiming that her mother was well known in the red light district. They asserted that not a day passed without the mother bearing marks on her face. The little girl touched her cheek, hesitating whether to heal her wound or not. Indeed, she possessed healing powers. As she walked, she noticed that the further she went, the warmer it became, and the tree leaves were dry in certain places. She wondered what was happening when she saw a wounded dragon lying on the ground. Approaching the dragon, the wary creature stood up. The little girl gestured, asking if it hurt, and added that she could help. Getting closer to the injured wings, the dragon let out a cry. The innocent-faced girl assured him that she meant no harm. Placing her hands on the dragon's wings, she tried to heal it, mentioning that the wound was deeper, requiring more energy. Using all her strength, she healed the dragon and then fainted. The dragon realized he had been healed, transformed into a handsome, imposing man. He looked at the little girl, stating that she was fearless. Still dazed, the girl wondered if it was a man's voice. Several years later, while one of the servants was combing the girl's hair, she remarked that despite dyeing the girl's hair blonde, it was spoiled by the pimples on her face. She was forced to dye her hair blonde because she married an old king who generally liked girls with blonde hair. The other servants speculated that when the old king grew tired of his concubines, he tended to kill them. In her thoughts, the girl realized she had been sold as a mistress to an old king at the age of 20. She regretted the day she had the chance to escape but encountered a dragon and decided to heal his wounds before losing consciousness. Meanwhile, the servants covered her face with makeup, attempting to conceal the pimples on the girl's face. Finally ready, her stepmother told her she was even uglier than before. The stepmother hoped the old king would not be disappointed, but her son reassured her, saying he had prepared a handsome dowry. When the mother asked where he found all these treasures, the son replied that a dark mage had indicated hidden treasures in the tomb of Tillard located near the border. His mother, surprised and angry that her son plundered the sacred place where the Teilhard dragon tribe revered their ancestors, called him an idiot and asked if he had touched Mezalok, the tombs of Teilhard. Suddenly, he heard noises outside the castle. The mother wondered what was happening. The young girl looked out the window and saw that the castle was under attack by dragons and warriors from Teilhard. The chief of the warriors entered the residence and killed all the knights in the castle standing in his way. He looked at the young girl, who observed the scene through the castle window. Fearful, the girl knelt. The warrior chief removed his mask, saying that they had tarnished the honor of Emzalek de Teilhard. He ordered his troops to burn all the inhabitants of this castle, including the knights, while the dragons burned the people in the castle. One of the soldiers informed the queen that the castle walls were collapsing. Fear-stricken, the queen told the soldiers to raise the white flag, admitting their defeat. Meanwhile, the girl thought it was the perfect time to escape from the castle. She decided to hide in the north tower and then climb the wall to escape. The queen, her son, and the other soldiers knelt before the Teilhard warriors. One of the Teilhard warriors asked his chief what to do now that the queen and her soldiers had surrendered. The chief of the Teilhard warriors ordered them to behead them and offer their heads on stakes. The queen panicked. One of the soldiers begged for forgiveness but was beheaded immediately. Terrified by this horrible scene, the queen's son sought comfort from his mother. The warrior chief cast a terrifying glance at the queen. The son begged for the warrior chief's forgiveness and promised to return the treasures in exchange for their lives. The warrior chief replied that after tarnishing the honor of Emzal de Teilhard, they thought he would spare their lives. He ordered his warriors to burn the castle and kill all the humans. One of the warriors who noticed the queen and her son were in shock from the chief warrior's words. The son told his mother, crying, that it was the fault of the dark mage who had incited them to plunder the tombs. In her thoughts, the queen knew she had to find a solution quickly, or they would all die. While one of the warriors prepared to kill them, the queen screamed, offering her daughter, who was about to marry the king of Brion. The queen knew that the warrior chief and King Brion were enemies and thought her plan would work. The warrior chief smiled and asked the queen where her daughter was. Meanwhile, the girl escaped from the top of the tower but was caught by a dragon. She saw the decapitated knights' heads thrown before the warrior chief by the dragon. The chief asked the queen if this was her daughter. Terrified, the girl thought she would be beheaded like the other knights. The warrior chief said she wasn't as beautiful as the queen described. He genuinely wondered if King Brion intended to marry her. He added that the girl had a mysterious gaze, and her eyes resembled the stars in the night sky. He recalled the day when he saw similar eyes when he was wounded, and a little girl healed him 10 years ago. He assumed the girl lived nearby, mentioning that this young girl had blonde hair, unlike the little girl 10 years ago who had white hair. The queen asked the chief to give her some more time before sending her to their dwelling. The warrior chief pointed his weapon at the young girl and offered her two options: be his wife or be buried alive with everyone else in the tomb of her ancestors. Fearful, the young girl accepted the first option. The warrior chief approached the young girl and asked for her name. The young girl's name was Lucina. The warrior chief remarked that Lucina meant moon in the language of Brion, adding that her name suited her well. He introduced himself as Akan and declared that he would take good care of her. Akan then asked if anyone could preside over a wedding ceremony in the kingdom of Brion. He called the priest and asked him to come and preside over the ceremony, adding that he would marry Lucina on the spot. The queen was astonished. Han told the priest that once the ceremony was over, he would testify to his marriage with Lucina. The priest asked him before whom he would testify, and Han replied before his king, Bronn. Han smiled and announced that he would finally make King Brion pay for the assassins he had sent to kill his young dragons 10 years ago. The queen was shocked and thought that Hakon intended to use Lucina to provoke the king of Brion. The ceremony began, but Han noticed that the atmosphere was too gloomy for a wedding. He asked his warriors to bring flowers, and they left to gather them. One of the warriors handed the flowers to Han, who gave them to Lucina, explaining that, as far as he knew, the bride holds a bouquet of flowers. Lucina took the flowers. Akan told the priest he could begin the ceremony. The priest began and announced that the groom could kiss the bride. Lucina was shocked and embarrassed. The priest suggested skipping this part and addressing God, but Han refused, stating that he did not believe in their God. The priest agreed to seal their vows with a kiss and concluded the ceremony with Han's oath. Han approached Lucina, their eyes met. Akan reassured his wife, telling her that if she continued like this, she would faint. He asked her to close her eyes. Their lips drew closer and he kissed her tenderly. Lucina commented that Han smelled of sweat and blood, then fainted in her husband's arms. The Dragon King, one of the warriors, told King Dragon Han that he should have simply kissed her with love instead of making her faint. Akan wondered if his kiss had been that bad, then mounted his horse with his wife Lucina. He threatened the queen, saying that if she touched the treasures of Melloc to Teard again, he would erase the castle from the map without a trace, and then he left. The queen told her son that she must find Lucina at all costs, but her son asked why. The queen replied that she had sold her to the king of Brion in exchange for her future, adding that she could not deprive them of her like that. Her son retorted that almost all the soldiers were dead. The queen declared that she would hire mercenaries. As they left, Lucina woke up in the carriage, surprised, wondering where she was. One of the warriors informed the Dragon King that his wife, Lucina, was already awake. The king turned to her, asking if she had slept well, but she blushed, and the king informed the other warriors that they would stop here and have a meal. He ordered his warriors to set up tents. The king opened the carriage door and asked his wife how she felt. He mentioned being surprised when she fainted during the kiss. Trembling with fear, Lucina replied that she was fine. The Dragon King extended his hand, saying she hadn't eaten all day and must be hungry. He invited her to come. Lucina replied that she didn't feel like eating and would like to stay in the carriage. She blushed, but the Dragon King smiled, saying his wife was rather shy. The king told his wife that it was dark in the carriage, and she should accompany him to a warmer place. Attracted by the smell of food, Lucina accepted and took his hand. One of the warriors led them to their tent. Arriving, the king told his wife to sit, covered her with a blanket, and gave her food. In her thoughts, Lucina said that at Barenberg's residence, they only gave her dry and moldy bread. She hesitated before eating. The king, angry, asked if she thought he had put poison in the food. He added that he did not engage in such cowardice. His embarrassed wife replied no and tasted the bread. Surprised, she declared it was delicious, mentioning smoked fish and salad that accompanied the bread, enhancing the taste. The king stared at her, smiled, and told her to eat slowly to avoid stomach pain. He then gave her sheep's milk, assuring her there was no poison inside. In her thoughts, Lucina considered how she had to work hard all day at Barenberg's castle to receive a piece of bread. But here, she could eat a delicious meal without doing anything next to the Dragon King, her husband. While eating, King Han told her to wait a little longer, and soon she could have a good meal. Lucina told the king that the bread was delicious. In his thoughts, the king thought Lucina might be quite modest because she was the daughter of a noble family, but he was wrong. He added that she spoke little, perhaps because she was always afraid of him. The king told his wife to rest if she had finished her meal, adding that from tonight, they would sleep in the same bed as husband and wife. Lucina, surprised, blushed. The king stated that he had heard that young couples slept together from their first wedding night. Lucina shed tears, but the king told her that he was only asking about their customs after marriage. He explained that among the warriors of Teard, they cohabited first before marrying and becoming pregnant afterward. Lucina was shocked learning about the warriors' customs. The king told her not to cry, wiped her tears, and added that he had no intention of making her cry. He asked his wife if she would have preferred becoming King Brillen's mistress instead of marrying him. Lucina replied negatively, shaking her head. In his thoughts, Akan thought Lucina was afraid of him because he had killed innocents. Lucina asked the Dragon King, her husband, what Teard looked like. Lucina still regarded him as a barbarian from Teard, so he left and told his wife not to worry, assuring her that he would not harm her. He added that he would sleep outside. The Dragon King joined his warriors outside. One of the warriors asked why he was leaving his wife Lucina alone in the tent. The king replied that he would sleep outside. The warrior said that in Brion's tradition, they were supposed to spend the night together and they had prepared a tent for that purpose. The king retorted that his wife wouldn't be able to handle it, emphasizing that it had been a tough day for her. She had been forcefully taken by barbarians, and now she was asked to sleep with a stranger. The warrior told the king that it was he who had wanted to bury all the humans from Berg in the graves of Mesala. He asked the king why he cared so much about his wife when he had initially planned to kill her. The king replied that she was now his wife and asked the warrior to watch his words. The warrior said he had never been interested in women before and asked the king if it was because of her that he spared the lives of people in the castle. The king explained that his wife reminded him of someone, adding that this little girl must also live near the castle. He supposed he could return the favor by leaving the people of Berg alone. The warrior replied that their sudden marriage was indeed a good thing for the future of the kingdom concerning descendants. He added that their tribe had difficulty conceiving children and suggested the king get closer to women. As the day dawned, Lucina woke up. She heard the sound of running water and thought there was a stream nearby where she could wash. While cleaning her face, her reflection appeared in the water and she noticed that her pimples had become even redder than before. She wondered if she should treat them or not. She remembered King Han's words, saying they would sleep together anyway. She thought that if she was ugly, the Dragon King might not touch her. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her, turned around, and saw a man. She was then kidnapped by mercenaries. One of the mercenaries guarding Lucina told his companion that it was much easier than he thought. He wondered how much Baroness Berg would offer for her. His companion told him that he had to pass through the forest, risking being spotted by dragons. Lucina heard the mercenaries' words and learned that her mother-in-law had hired mercenaries to get her back. She decided she didn't want to return to the castle. While they were in the forest, it started raining. One of the mercenaries said that, according to rumors in the Foix forest, if you didn't give a peanut to a Fuka dwarf elf during the journey through the forest, it would make it rain. The second replied that it was good for them, and the warriors of Teard would have a hard time finding their trace. Lucina shivered from the cold. One of the mercenaries wondered if she was sick, adding that she needed to stay alive until they reached their destination. During this time, the one guarding Lucina wondered what was wrong with her face. While the mercenaries discussed Lucina's current condition, an arrow pierced one of the mercenaries' neck, killing him. The other mercenaries panicked, and when they turned around, they saw warriors from Teard. The warriors killed all the other mercenaries with arrows. The mercenary in charge of Lucina threatened the Dragon King to kill her, but the Dragon King gestured to Lucina, telling her to close her eyes. Lucina closed her eyes, and the mercenary's head was swiftly cut off by the Dragon King. The king asked Lucina how she was feeling. In her thoughts, Lucina said that her husband, the Dragon King, was covered in blood just like the first time. She added that she felt safer with him. The Dragon King had his wife dismount from the horse and untied her. He touched her head and noticed that she had a fever. His wife, Lucina, blushed. He apologized for his delay, telling her that she must have been very scared. Gently, the king took his wife in his arms. He ordered his warriors to prepare a fire so she could warm up as soon as they exited the forest, and to provide her with clean clothes so she could change. One of the warriors nodded. In her thoughts, Lucina said that she preferred staying with the king rather than returning to her previous life at Baron Berg's castle. While Lucina was cleaning her face, she noticed that her pimples had worsened due to the fever. She wondered if she should treat herself or not. She remembered the words of King Han, who said they would sleep together anyway. She thought that if she was ugly, the Dragon King might not touch her. Suddenly, she heard a voice talking to her. She turned around and saw an elf, whom she asked for his name. The elf introduced himself as Foix and added that he was the elf of the forest. Lucina asked if he was the dwarf elf who made it rain if not given a peanut. The elf replied that he was not a dwarf and specified that he was taller than other elves in the forest. He added that she was much more talkative than yesterday. Surprised, Lucina asked if he had been observing her since yesterday, and the elf affirmed. He added that she had a slightly different energy from the others. He asked if she had a healing gift. Lucina, surprised, smiled and asked how he knew. The elf explained that as an elf, he could sense such things. He advised Lucina not to use her gift carelessly as it could attract the attention of all the tribes, putting her in danger. Lucina thanked him for the warning. The elf asked why she didn't speak yesterday and if she was afraid to speak in public. Lucina replied affirmatively, adding that every time she tried to speak, people got angry with her, sometimes even to the point of mistreating her. The elf asked if it was because he wasn't human that she felt comfortable with him. Lucina replied negatively, explaining that it was simply because he didn't scare her and he was cute, smiling. She even recounted that she had encountered an injured dragon and had healed it. She had wished to talk, but she had lost consciousness after helping it heal. The elf thought she was really talkative. Suddenly, the king asked his wife if she could enter the tent, and the elf fled. Akin, the Dragon King, told his wife that there were no more spare clothes, but he discovered that her face was covered with pimples and marks. Lucina, hiding her face, explained that it was due to the fever. The king approached her, touched her forehead, and asked if the fever was causing the marks. He inquired if she was not sick after all. The king asked Chelan, one of his warriors, to call a doctor as quickly as possible. Chelan approached the prince and asked what was happening, then immediately left with the Dragon King, stating that it was smallpox and he should stay away to avoid contamination. Chelan explained that they had been ravaged by smallpox from Brion in the past, and the symptoms were the same. Lucina tried to defend herself, saying it wasn't smallpox but a reaction to the sulfur in the dye she used to color her hair. She became increasingly nervous and couldn't explain herself. Chelan wondered if she had lost her mind due to the rain. Lucina recalled the day she had been mistreated by her stepmother when trying to explain, and the maids had speculated about why she spoke more than staying silent. She recounted that nobody had cared when she tried to explain to people. Chelan explained that it was smallpox and advised the king not to bring her to the palace. The other warriors speculated about her health, wondering if it was indeed smallpox. King Han told Chelan to lower his weapon and added that he didn't know yet if it was smallpox. He asked his wife what she wanted to explain. Lucina explained that the pimples were due to a reaction to the sulfur in the dye she used to color her hair. She became increasingly nervous and couldn't explain herself. Chelan wondered if she had lost her mind due to the rain. Lucina recalled the day she had been mistreated by her stepmother when trying to explain, and the maids had speculated about why she spoke more than staying silent. She recounted that nobody had cared when she tried to explain to people. Chelan explained that it was smallpox and advised the king not to bring her to the palace. The other warriors speculated about her health, wondering if it was indeed smallpox.
Lucina clarified her explanation, saying that the buttons were caused by a reaction to the sulfur in the hair dye she had applied. She couldn't explain herself and was becoming more and more anxious. Chelan wondered whether the rain had driven her insane. Lucina thought back to the day she was abused by her stepmother while she was attempting to defend herself, and the servants made assumptions about why she had spoken out rather than kept quiet. She recalled that when she attempted to defend herself in front of others, no one listened to her. Chelan informed the king that she had smallpox and suggested that he not bring her to the palace. It was thought by other warriors that she may have to be burnt in order to protect the Tillard people. Lucina was terrified and hesitant to utilize her abilities to heal herself since she believed she would be murdered, but then she recalled the elf's advice. The Dragon King comforted her, telling her not to worry and that he would do his best to comprehend the situation, no matter how long it took. Chelan informed the king that speaking with someone tainted for an extended period of time may be hazardous. Turning, the king said unequivocally that she was uncontaminated. When Chelan inquired for additional details, the king confirmed that fever was the first sign of smallpox and that the buttons often did not present at the same time. Chelan acknowledged that he had made a mistake by ignoring some information. Han contended that oral rashes and vomiting were the typical reasons why smallpox patients lost their appetite. He made note of his wife's continued hunger. Chelan admitted his mistake and declared that the king was correct. The monarch asked about the sulfur in dye problem that his wife had highlighted. With a smile on his face, he reassured her that he would keep her safe. Lucina related to him the whole tale of King Breelan's hair coloring and the application of dye to turn hair blonde. Chelan, meantime, watched the spectacle from a distance and wondered what was going on. That's when the Dragon King realized that his wife's buttons were caused by the blonde coloring dye. The monarch held his wife's head and told Chelan that the buttons were made of hair color, and the rain and fever made them more noticeable. Chelan said he had no idea that sulfur was the source of this particular sensitivity. Holding his wife tightly, the monarch responded to Chelan, saying that because he had kissed Lucina, they should have been burnt if she had smallpox. He also made it clear that anyone who had consumed beverages with him followed the same reasoning. Sick with terror, the other warriors reassured him that they trusted the Dragon King's judgment. Lucina looked at the Dragon King, thinking that this was the first time he had paid attention to her without passing judgment or becoming angry with her. The monarch advised his spouse to be warm in her tent and recommended that they travel together. A warrior entered the tent and informed the king that the kidnappers had admitted who was planning the assault. The abductors claimed that Baroness Berg had hired them. Surprised and infuriated, the Dragon King believed that they dared to attack him even after they had spared their lives. To make an example, he made the decision to travel to the castle himself and murder every individual. Lucina was taken aback. He said that they dared to assault his wife even after they had disgraced the riches of Malak de Théard and he had saved their lives. Lucina begged the monarch to spare the innocent people who were unrelated to this incident. The king asked his wife whether it would bother her if he slaughtered her family, shocked that she had not spoken up for his family. In her mind, Lucina speculated that the Baroness was not indeed her biological mother. Remembering the days when she had to put up with all sorts of abuse, she was undecided about telling the king the truth. She knelt before her husband and begged him to save her family's lives. She was still unwell, the Dragon King said as he requested her to rise. Then, after carrying her, he asked her what she would give him in exchange for his saving her family. The monarch remarked he was not the kind to pardon anybody who hurt his wife as their hands came together. In exchange for her in-law's life, he made a request. His wife awkwardly answered that she would give him everything he wanted. The king insisted in his mind that he thought of the small child he had cured when he was hurt every time he gazed into Lucina's eyes. He proposed kissing her in order to ensure her family's safety. The king reassured Lucina that it was really what he wished, even if she was taken aback. They looked at one another and Lucina felt her pulse quicken. She chose to avert her gaze and pressed her lips to the king's. Akin took the lead, giving her a soft kiss and a contented hug. He gave the warrior the command to bring the mercenaries back to Castlebur with their heads chopped off, and their heads burned in front of their eyes. He went on to say that they would meet the same end if they ventured to touch his wife once again. The fighter concurred. Han reassured Lucina that he would watch out for her while she laid on the bed and advised her to get some rest. After Lucina expressed her thanks, the monarch proposed giving her another kiss as a token of his appreciation. The monarch grinned, signaling that Lucina reddened and that it was all a jest. Lucina pondered whether the kiss had anything to do with the king's happiness, as she couldn't quite figure it out. She didn't fully understand why the monarch was treating her so well, despite the buttons on her face. Lucina was astounded by the splendor of Théard when she first arrived there. She believed that the Théardians were barbarians who even consumed soaring creatures and lived in huts or caves. She was encouraged to exit the carriage by Chelan. Ascending, she detected a blend of burnt flesh, taut muscles, and sulfur, and she wondered whether this scent caused vertigo. As she wavered, the king noticed and inquired about her vertigo. He continued by saying that people need more time to adjust since they had more earthy energy, and that Théard's lands carried a strong fire energy. In response, Lucina said she felt better now and that she felt secure with her husband, the king. What was her opinion of the Théard palace? The king asked. In response, Lucina said that the Théard kingdom wasn't what she had been told. The monarch shot back, saying that the Brionites did not regard the other Théard tribes, including the dragons, as human. He continued, saying that although Théard's culture was advanced, he did not see it as a monarchy. He said that Théard was the most beautiful and plentiful place on the continent, and that it was a gold mine. Lucina considered staying there going forward. The people of the Théard kingdom were happy to see the king return and speculated about Lucina's origin, wondering whether she was from Brionne, while the king pushed his wife to attend. Inquiring about her appearance, they also wanted to know whether she was ill. It was Lucina's sorrow not to have taken care of her buttons before visiting the Théard kingdom. Asking the monarch whether the weather was nice, two individuals bowed to him, greeted the priest by the king. The fact that the elderly lady was a priest astonished Lucina. If he had restored earthy vitality to their country, the priest questioned the monarch. With the intention of evaporating holy water over Lucina's face, he snatched it, but she cowered behind the king in fear. She was advised not to be scared by the king, who clarified that the purpose was to remove any negative spells that the visitor may have brought. He said the inhabitants of Théard, thinking their bodies and souls would be tainted by evil spells, cleansed themselves with holy water after visiting other countries. It functioned as a kind of greeting ritual. Using holy water, the priest conducted the welcoming ritual. This water was pleasant to Lucina's buttons, she observed. The priest encouraged them to enter the palace when the cleansing ritual was finished. Lucina saw that gold coated the whole castle. A girl walked up to the king and gave him a hug, telling him how proud she was of the king for showing tomb robbers how magnificent Théard was. When it was revealed that this girl was called Garette, Lucina was astounded by her extraordinary beauty. When the king asked Garette whether she was concerned about him, she said no. She went on to say she was certain he would succeed. She questioned the king about bringing Lucina as a prize and questioned if all the Brillen ladies were as repulsive and filthy as Lucina. She said that Lucina needed to tidy up a little. Lucina was taken aback. The king interrupted her as she was trying to clarify, presenting Lucina as his wife. Garette was taken aback. He declared that Lucina would have his child and that he could no longer allow the queen's seat to remain empty for an extended period of time. Furious, Garrett questioned the king's sincerity. Fleas were still dropping out of Lucina's hair, she noted. When the monarch inquired about the state of affairs, Lucina shot back, saying that it was all in the dye. Lucina speculated in her mind that it was due of the holy water. The monarch, in the back of his mind, was taken aback to learn that his wife had once had silver hair. It's only dye, he assured Garrett, so don't worry. Garrett retorted that her concerns were for the monarch, not for herself. She questioned the king about his belief that Lucina could carry out her duty in the same way as she had. When Lucina questioned the king about what duty she was referring to, he sidestepped the subject and told her to go change. He requested that Garrett provide his wife a servant. One of the slaves, Titi, was requested by Garrett to look after Lucina. Titi nodded, calling Garrett queen. Wondering whether Titi was the wife of Han's brother who passed away 10 years before, Lucina departed with her. She also said that the monarch and Garrett seemed to be quite intimate, almost like a couple. Servant Titi presented herself to Lucina and said that she would be serving her going forward. When Lucina inquired if it was her chamber, Titi said that it was and that she was not permitted to visit the queen's palace since she had not yet given birth to a child with the king. Titi added that in order for her to be formally recognized as queen, she needed to carry out her duty of bearing the king's kid. Lucina thought to herself that this was the subject Garrett had brought up previously. Lucina said yes when Titi asked if she could support her in changing. When Titi brought up the stain on her clothing, Lucina retorted that it was only melting color. She guessed that the holy water was what had calmed her face's buttons and dissolved the dye. When Lucina begged Titi for more holy water, the servant replied that she would obtain permission before departing. Then a maidservant appeared in Lucina's chamber and complimented her on having heeded his instruction. Surprised that a maidservant could communicate, Lucina saw life transform into an elf. It was the woodland elf Foi. If he had followed her here, Lucina inquired. Foi expressed his gratitude for being able to heed his counsel to abstain from using his healing power, and said that using holy water was a safer option. Feeling happy, Lucina asked Foi what sort of nuts he would like. She said she would check with her servant to see if any were at the palace. In response, Foi said he liked nuts of all types. Lucina told Foi that she believed living at the Teilhard Palace would make her feel better, and that it would be much more pleasant. She continued by saying she was certain she would be well fed and unhit by anybody. Lucina was questioned by Foi whether she felt comfortable having children with Han. In response, she said that while she was scared, she was already wed to the king. She further said that even though they had celebrated their marriage in Brion, their relationship had not been recognized by Teilhard's regulations. She acknowledged that spending their first night together after marriage was only natural, and that she would give it some more thought. Upon his return, the servant informed Lucina that she was authorized to use holy water. As King Han undressed, Chelan announced that the dragons had made their way back from Berg. If he had carried out his command, the monarch inquired. Chelan confirmed that terror had rendered Baroness Berg and her son utterly immobile. After bringing up the fact that the king's brother had been killed by the king of Brion, Chelan questioned the king about his true intentions to seize his revenge. He also said that they were seen to be stupid by the Brion people. The monarch reaffirmed that he would not spare them from punishment. He admitted that he was initially seeking confirmation, stating that 10 years before, while hunting his brother's assassins, he had been wounded by an arrow and had been cured by a little girl. He acknowledged that he would not be here if it weren't for that young kid. The girl ought to be an adult by now, Chelan shot back. Confirmed, the king said he would choose to spare the girl. Chelan proposed that her healing abilities would be beneficial to the Teilhard kingdom. 10 years ago, he questioned the monarch why he had not abducted that girl. In response, the monarch asked Chelan whether he wanted him to abduct the girl whose family had spared his life. He continued by saying that the girl looked pretty unhappy and had several scratches on her face. The child may be the daughter of a peasant, he surmised. Her eyes and hair were silver, he continued. Before assaulting the country of Berg, he gave Tuan the command to locate that girl. He requested that Tuan investigate whether or not his wife was the Baron's legal daughter. Tuan looked astonished. The monarch felt to himself that while his bride came from a noble family, she was a little too self-assured and did not show any loyalty to her family. He gave Tuan the command to find out about his wife's early years. Could the Baroness have lied about Lucina? Tuan wondered. Chelan, nevertheless, bowed and turned to walk away. The monarch said that he would want to be alone himself and have a dip in the hot spring. Tuan was taken aback, but the king inquired as to whether he had said anything. He gave a negative response in response. Hot spring swimming was Lucina's activity on the other side of the palace. Her hair had returned to its natural hue, and she was happy that the buttons were no longer there. She acknowledged the efficacy of holy water. She was shocked to see the king step into the bath all of a sudden. She made the decision to conceal and watched him intently from a distance, unsure of how she would respond. The king saw a mysterious shadow behind a statue as he was taking a bath. If she didn't respond, he questioned who had inquired and guessed that it was one of the maids. He inquired who had let her visit the hot spring, replying that he had made it plain he wished to be left alone. Lucina's pulse was pounding from sheer dread. Remembering the past, the enraged monarch pondered whether Tuan was to blame, sending ladies to entice him as was his custom. When he got close to the monument, Lucina lost control and went beneath. She drew back, hoping to get away as soon as she spotted the king coming. But the enraged king took hold of her arm. But she slid, and the two found themselves in close proximity, causing an obvious tension to arise. Astonished, the monarch said that the girl's eyes gleamed like the moon and he wondered who she was. He connected the dots with his wife, Lucina, remembering having seen those eyes previously. He realized that his wife's hair had formerly been silver. He continued by saying that his wife resembled the girl who had come to his rescue 10 years before. So Lucina took a step back. He drew a parallel, pointing out that Lucina was 20 years old. Terrified, Lucina assumed her husband was upset with her and that she would be struck. She begged her husband to pardon her, but he was not really sure what was going on. After getting ready, he gave his wife the assurance that she would not be struck in his castle. He went on to say that he could never strike a body as delicate and kind. The king stroked her hair and asked her why she was here. In response, she said she wanted to bathe in holy water. The monarch recalled that the attendant had arrived to request permission to use sacred water. He went on to say he had no idea she intended to take a bath in it. The monarch kept stroking her face while expressing regret for frightening her. His spouse informed him that she had improved. In particular, he asked his wife not to denigrate herself when she became the mistress of this castle after bearing his kid. She flushed as he held her against his body. He went on to say that he wanted his future queen to enter the palace with dignity and with her head held high. The king shot back, saying he had just instructed her not to apologize. She apologized. The monarch thought the young girl was brave as he recalled the day she had rescued him. She was courageous, he said. He said that the small girl didn't appear to be from an aristocratic family and likened her to his wife, Lucina. He said his wife would never have allowed herself to be mistakenly diagnosed with smallpox if she had really been that young kid 10 years ago. Lucina made the decision to go as a result. But the king grinned, grabbed her hair, pulled it slightly in his direction, and gave her a hug. Had she had her last shower? He inquired. With a flush, she said that she had. Then the monarch proposed that they get back together. Lucina questioned him about his whereabouts as he embraced his wife. The monarch said, to his room, of course, and clarified that since they were married, sharing a bed was customary for them. She worried, however, and the king questioned if she still feared him. After a little while, Lucina was getting ready for the night by Titi, one of the servants, and 2 other servants. Titi said that the king would be utterly mesmerized and that she looked considerably more stunning with this hair color. Given her extreme thinness, the 2 other slaves questioned if Lucina could withstand the king. When Lucina insisted on more explanation, a servant shot back at her, asking if she didn't understand why the monarch avoided females. The girl ran the danger of dying after spending the night with the monarch, the second servant retorted. Lucina questioned how she might pass away. The girl may die, the second servant said, if she could not withstand the splendor of the dragon clan. Titi reassured her, therefore, that she could bear it. Furious, Garrett and Lucina took off. Lucina wondered whether the king was cruel in her thoughts. Lucina felt ashamed and therefore introduced herself to the king. Astonished by his wife's attractiveness, the monarch urged her to approach him. He touched her hair and said that he had used that cheap color to cover up her gorgeous hair. It was the first time, Lucina thought to herself, that someone had told her she was lovely. The monarch walked up to his spouse and asked her in a whisper whether she would push him away this time if he kissed her. With a flush, Lucina shook her head and gave a negative response. The king grinned, and they planted a gentle kiss as their lips met. She said that the king's lips were warm and gentle, and her heart was racing. The monarch then took off his shirt, revealing a tattoo that Lucina found admirable. He clarified that his wife may touch it and that it was his home tribe's symbol. Touching his body in her thoughts, Lucina blushed as she realized it was as hard as touching a rock. If she wanted to remain with him, the king inquired. Gently, he placed his spouse on the bed. Remembering what the servants had spoken, she worried that she wouldn't make it if the king struck her with those arms. The monarch, shivering with terror, saw that his wife was alarmed and got to her feet. Lucina pondered in her mind whether the king was upset. After seeming not to be furious, the monarch asked his wife whether she was ready to return home. She gave a regretful nod, adding that this was where she belonged. She wanted to become Teilhard's queen and have his kid now that she was his wife. The king inquired as to whether she knew what this position entailed. He asked whether she was ready to die and explained that it meant she may be ready to die for him and Teilhard. She didn't say anything, so the king dressed, promised to touch her when she was ready, and left her in the chamber by herself. A few days later, the servants conjectured about what had transpired, pointing out that the monarch had not paid Lucina a visit since that day. Lucina heard what they said. The king may wed Gerrit, the servants continued. The remarks of the servants surprised Lucina. According to a servant, in the Teilhard royal dynasty, the younger brother often carries on his elder brother's married life in the event of the latter's death. That was the safest choice, she continued. Lucina was overcome with sadness as she recalled her initial impression of King Han and Gerrit's intimate conversation when they first entered the palace. Did King Dragon adore Gerrit, she thought. Lucina pondered in her bed that Han had not paid her a visit since that dreadful night. She considered what Titi had said, attempting to comfort herself that it was just because the king had not been at the castle recently, and that he would come see her when he got back. However, Lucina had heard tales from childhood that the monarch had a thing on his beautiful sister-in-law. She believed she had little hope of winning the king over if he could love a lady as lovely as Gerrit. She confessed to being a coward, believing the monarch would undoubtedly feel sorry for her. Titi came into the chamber, telling Lucina that the king was back, and advised her to go meet him. While hurrying to welcome her spouse, Lucina ran into Gerrit. She acknowledged that even with Lucina's altered hair color, she had recognized her right away. Embarrassed, Lucina welcomed Gerrit. Gerrit shot back, stating that she didn't understand Lucina and that the king usually left her alone herself in the chamber. Lucina, dejected, went on her way. Gerrit grabbed Lucina's hand, dropped her gaze, and said that Lucina was too frail to spend the night with the king. Lucina didn't understand why she would die after spending a night with the king, even if she was going to die in the end. Gerrit was shocked that the king had not warned his wife that if she did end up spending the night with him, she may die. Gerrit clarified that few women could withstand the fire energy and live in the Teilhard palace, comparing it to a tomb. She recommended Lucina leave the castle and told her to give up on her dream of becoming queen. Gerrit and Lucina bowed as the king arrived. When the king inquired as to whether Gerrit was speaking with his wife, she said that Lucina was incapable of even pronouncing words properly. As a previous queen, she said she would provide some guidance. Then, Gerrit informed the king that he was seriously mistaken, highlighting Lucina's frailty and timidity, rendering her unworthy to be a dragon tribe member's wife. The monarch asked his wife to accompany him and thanked her for the advice, stating he could handle it himself. Lucina walked behind her spouse. The king acknowledged that they hadn't seen one another in a few days and mentioned his hectic schedule. He asked Lucina whether everything had gone well at the palace while he was away, and she replied that it had. He asked if she had anything to tell him, and Lucina was thinking a lot but was having trouble getting her thoughts together. The king recognized in his mind that his wife was suffering as a result of what he had spoken to her the previous time. The king advised his spouse to consider him and the king of Brionne to be similar in their views, but she pushed it aside, drawing nearer to him. She said he was different, that he had listened to her without becoming upset for the first time in her life. Lucina confirmed that it was the first time someone had listened to her all the way through when the king inquired. The monarch said that because she was Baron Berg's sole daughter, he ought to pay attention to her. When he questioned why other people disregarded her, Lucina chose to conceal the fact that she was an adopted kid. She explained to the king that it was because she stumbled a lot under pressure. In his mind, the king realized why her family had chosen to wed her to a more senior monarch. He stroked her hair and stated he would treasure her and dress her in gold jewels if he had a daughter as lovely as her. Lucina's pulse raced as she flushed. The king was notified by a warrior that Hadar had vanished. After telling his stunned wife he had an important issue to handle, the monarch promised to visit her later. After giving her husband's remarks some thought, Lucina blushed and remarked that the king thought she was very cute. This made her heart accelerate. The next day, Lucina was thrilled and reminded of the king's remarks about how gorgeous she was as she looked at herself in the mirror. She also remembered Gerrit's warning that she may die during delivery if she was unable to process fire energy, and that she might have to spend the night with the king. When she pressed Titi for additional details, the reluctant servant revealed that she ought to have a dragon tribe kid. When Lucina inquired as to whether it was possible to die giving birth, Titi said that it was possible, and that the dangers and difficulties were greater for dragon tribe offspring. Lucina questioned if her little stature would lead her to pass away. In response, Titi said that if a lady had a child for the monarch, she may become a queen. She continued by saying that Gerrit gave birth to a child of the former monarch, transforming her from a servant from a lowly background into a queen. Lucina reasoned that no one would wonder where she came from if she had a kid with the king. Lucina was soothed by Titi, who told her she would make a fantastic queen and give birth to a beautiful child. She advised Lucina to dress sensually. The monarch is sitting with Chelan, his right-hand man, while a sick lady is laying on the bed on the other side of the palace. The ill wife was shocked to see him go abruptly for the Berg kingdom, the king said, sounding sorrowful. He said she was afraid he was going to join a war, therefore she wanted to follow him. This lady turned out to be the mother of the king. The king revealed that his mother, Adar, was a magnificent queen who was well liked by everybody for having been blessed with fire and giving birth to 2 dragon protector males. The monarch went on to say that she had gone insane when his son Ron died 10 years ago. Ron had not been buried in the Mesoluk tombs for 10 years because she would not acknowledge his death. Han now said that his mother never left the sacred cave in front of Kashyyyk, where Ron's corpse was maintained, since she thought they would remove Ron's body from her. She continued to hope that one day he will open his eyes. Chelan questioned whether the king was heading to the secondary palace once he departed. In response, the monarch said he wasn't feeling like going there. In response, a furious Tuan said that if the king wasn't attracted to his wife Lucina, he ought to try to find a female who could carry him a child. He recommended that the king meet Garrett at the very least. He underlined that there would be no more dragon protector descendants if anything occurred to the last monarch, who had died in a bloodbath 10 years before. That's why he got married, the king said. He had left the room with his wife and hadn't come back, Tuan pointed out. He continued by saying that up to his latter days, his brother, the former monarch, was surrounded by women. Tuan said that his brother had found a suitable partner with whom to start a family. The king shot back, saying that many females died after spending a night with Garrett, even if he had a kid with his brother. He said that women from other tribes found it difficult to withstand the excessively strong fire energy, and that the dragon protector seldom gave birth to a female. When the king asked Tuan how many ladies had given their lives in defense of his brother, Tuan replied that the women had made their decision. He went on to say that despite the dangers, impoverished women wanted to be queens and have children with the monarch. The king countered that it was untrue, citing information from his brother Ryan that most ladies who dared to try their luck were bought out by their families. The majority of ladies, he said, were terrified to sleep with the monarch. He said that the reason his brother liked Garrett so much was because she was the only lady who went with Ron to bed fearlessly. Given that she had been successful in having a child with the last monarch, Chelan proposed that the king wed Garrett. The king recalled the day when his brother Rakan informed him that he really loved Garrett and wanted to be buried next to her in Malak. He went on to say that this was the reason it was advised that one marry a sister-in-law within the royal family. Rakan wished Han would meet a woman he could really fall in love with. In response, the king asked Chelan why their tribe was compelled to sacrifice women in order to procreate and declared that he would not wed Garrett. According to Chelan, Teilhard would have been subjugated by nearby countries and its inhabitants would have ended up as slaves if not for the dragon tribe. He continued by saying that Brian's humans viewed Teilhard's half-dragons like monsters and that they may attempt to exterminate every tribe of demi-humans, just as they had done a decade before. He said that while Brian people saw them as barbarians, they dared not go into their domain because of their tribe's fire force. To keep Teilhard safe, Chelan counseled the king to go see his wife Lucina and get her pregnant with a dragon protector kid. He stressed the king's obligation to Teilhard. The king asked himself what would happen if his spouse passed away. The king had already accepted her as his wife, so Chelan, who was incensed, said he didn't understand why he cared so much for Lucina. He continued by saying that if Akan hadn't brought Lucina here, the king of Brian would have murdered her. Chelan instructed the king to give his wife the option of becoming queen by bearing a child or dying after being married to an elderly monarch. Titi told Lucina the king had come to visit her while she was in her chamber. The monarch asked whether she was still sleeping as he came holding an alcohol bottle. After telling Titi to go, he went over to Lucina, praised her appearance, and inquired as to whether she missed him. The monarch gave her an impromptu kiss while stroking her face and watching her flush, promising to visit more often after that. Lucina was happy with this idea, at least in her mind. Lucina felt the warmth of their kiss and timidly requested for more. The monarch asked if she was scared of him, but she put her arms around his neck and gave him a gentle kiss. The king brought her to the bed and carefully laid her down as they kissed some more. The king asked Lucina whether she was willing to stake her life for him and Teilhard, and her heart skipped a beat. In response, she said she didn't know, but if the king thought she was very cute, she would want to know. The king grinned, said the Brian people were blind, stroked her hair, and admitted she was a very lovely lady. She was, he confirmed, the cutest lady he had ever seen. Abruptly, Lucina recalled gossip that the monarch had a thing for his sister-in-law, Garrett, back in his youth. She questioned if he loved Garrett and wondered whether he did the same with her, pushing the king away. The monarch hardly comprehended her question, but Lucina persisted, bringing up the tidings of his early affections for Garrett. The king threatened to depart if she persisted, and Lucina believed that he had not rejected his childhood affections for Garrett. She said that the king was lying when he called her cute and claimed that she wasn't as attractive as Garrett. The monarch was taken aback, and Lucina went on to say that he preferred Garrett over her. The monarch replied angrily, bowing down and ordering Lucina to quit lying. He advised her to express her desire not to become his partner so as not to irritate him. Once again, he departed, leaving his wife by herself. Garrett was informed of the news by 2 servants the next morning. One of them said that Lucina turned down the king out of fear. According to the other, Lucina refused to share a bed with a being that she saw as a monster. With a smirk, Garrett said that the king detested scared women, and that he was sure he would get tired of this human quickly. Garrett acknowledged that she had been concerned about her title when she initially brought Lucina before the king, but that was now unfounded concern. A servant shot back, saying the king would regret marrying Lucina when he saw she wasn't fit to be Teilhard's queen. She went on to say that typically, Garrett would become queen once again and carry the king's kid. The monarch, according to the second servant, had admired Garrett since he was a little boy and felt bad about his brother. With a grin, Garrett recalled her time as the old king's wife and how young Han used to gaze at her. She said he wanted her, but that he started avoiding her out of remorse after the murder of his brother. Garrett said that she was the mistress of the queen's palace and that no one could replace her, predicting that the king would return to her sooner or later. Conversely, a dejected Lucina realized that the monarch had not paid her a visit since that day. With a promise to come back, Titi consoled her. Lucina came to the realization that her poor communication skills often infuriated the monarch. She told Titi, her servant, that she wanted to change and asked for her assistance. Lucina sought to Titi, seeking assistance on how to make her speech sound better. Startled but eager to assist, Titi recommended that they work on improving her oral abilities together, stressing the need of not stuttering. She said that since coming to the palace, she had worked hard to hone her eloquence. Lucina inquired about Titi's tribe, taken aback that she wasn't from Teilhard. Titi gave a detailed explanation of her background, saying that she was from Rwanda and had worked as a servant to support her 16 sisters' schooling. Titi let Lucina rehearse, but as they were finishing up, a servant came to tell Lucina that Garrett wanted to talk to her at the queen's court. Garrett contacted Lucina to propose a dress for the next royal occasion, encouraging her to put the trained methods to use. The attendant displayed a black gown, which in Brionne signifies grief. Lucina was curious about the meaning of Teilhard and asked Titi to clarify that it looked like burial clothes. Noting Lucina's rejection to spend the night with Han, Garrett went on to say that she had selected the outfit for Lucina. She advised Lucina to wear the outfit to symbolize her want to go back home if she chose to leave the realm. Garrett begged Lucina to embrace this act of candor, expressing sympathy for her. Lucina was nervous back in her room, thinking Han would see her outfit as an indication that she wanted to go back to Brionne. But while they were speaking, a voice from Hadar entered the room and introduced herself. When Titi and Lucina questioned who she was, Hadar pretended to be Rita, the leader of the servants, and spoke lies. Hadar surmised Lucina was grieving since she was on a black outfit. To be clear, Lucina said she wore it to the dinner that was coming up. Hadar asked for food in return for her assistance in fixing the outfit. When Garrett heard that Adar had vanished from the palace, she ordered the servants to take her back to her chamber and told them not to tell the king. Hadar finished eating and started working on the dress. As they watched her cut the cloth, Lucina and Titi voiced their concerns, but Hadar soothed them and asked them to put their confidence in her. She assured me that the garment would highlight Lucina's attractiveness. Watching through the half-open door, Garrett said to the staff that she had not seen Hadar having so much pleasure in a long time and begged that they leave them alone. Hadar recommended that Lucina try the garment on when she was done. Lucina embarrassed herself by covering herself with the cloth. While trying to take off the cloth, Titi saw that the dress had improved much and acknowledged that Lucina looked stunning. As the royal feast got underway, Han asked his guard Tuan about Lucina. Garrett then stepped in and said that Lucina could be afraid of Han and feel uneasy around him. Then Han gave Tuan instructions to see how Lucina was doing, asking her not to feel obligated to come if it made her uncomfortable. Akin was not pleased, so Garrett offered to amuse the king with a dance. Garrett's motions were as exquisite as ever, Chelan informed the king. Lucina was not wearing the queen's preferred attire, thus Titi and Lucina were not allowed to attend the feast. The guard sensed the king's wife's appeal in her thoughts. Titi clarified that she had followed Garrett's directions and made a little alteration to the original garment. The soldier denied them admittance and pushed Titi to the ground, presumably thinking that Lucina was a lady the king had rejected and that no kindness was required. Abruptly, Foi noticed the dissonance and soared close by. Lucina hoped that Foi would assist her. As Garrett performed in front of him, Han, who had consumed some wine, was a little tipsy. He spoke of his early years with his brother Ryan, a legendary knight who had brought together many tribes to establish a kingdom. Han, who coveted everything that belonged to his brother, including the crown and his wife, adored Ryan, who was well liked and revered by everyone. Han put himself in Ryan's shoes and imagined that he had everything Ryan had. He made it clear that Ryan's death was the result of his aspirational goals. Ryan said he wanted to meet Garrett one more time, even in his dying moments of protection. Following the king's demise, Han found himself compelled to take the throne and establish a family with Garrett. But just as Akin was ready to go close to Garrett, he thought back to Ryan's affection for her. Han assured her that Ryan was the rightful owner of her love, hence she was under no need to comply. Astonishing him, Garrett gave him a surprise hug from behind and declared her love for Akin in the masculine sense, adding that Ryan was her true love as he was a king. She said, "I've always loved Han." After being shocked by what Garrett had said, Han was confused when Garrett took off his clothes and made the offer to stay the night. He was dumbfounded by his recollections. He was taken aback to see Lucina's stunning beauty and her silver hair. Han was startled by her presence and believed that she was an angel coming down from the moon. Her appearance alone made him feel better right away. Just a few minutes before, Titi and Lucina were able to enter the feast covertly as Foi had skillfully diverted the guard's attention. Drawing on her bravery and remembering her instruction from Titi, Lucina walked elegantly up to Han, bowed, and wished him everlasting bliss as the great king of Teard. The monarch was intrigued and questioned if the girl in front of him was really the same Lucina he had previously met. After blushing, Han saw that Lucina seemed to be running late. But before Lucina could clarify, Titi intervened and informed the king that they had run into trouble. The monarch was encouraged by this to get closer to Lucina, examining her arm and seeing a bruise. Han was incensed by the prescribed dress code and demanded an explanation. Worried, he asked Titi what had happened to Lucina, to which Titi replied that the guard had stopped them from entering because Lucina was not wearing the appropriate outfit. When Titi brought up the queen, Garrett looked astonished. Garrett smacked the guard without thinking twice, telling him that the costume she'd given Lucina was the right one. She pretended to be worried about Lucina, explained what she understood, and even promised to look after the guard. The king, however, demanded Chelan give him his sword and that Garrett didn't need to step in. Han went up to the guard and demanded his sword, saying that the guard had the audacity to hurt his wife and mistrust the king of Teard, so damaging the reputation of the country. He said that the guard's life should be used as payment for similar offenses. At this, Akin put his cloak over her and told her that no one in the castle could touch her but him. Lucina then reassured Han that she was well. The monarch drew Lucina closer, explaining that to be false to her would be to be disloyal to the king as well, and that would result in their deaths. The guard bowed, begging for pardon as Lucina reddened in terror, begging for Garrett to grudgingly step in. Is it really essential to execute the guard during the feast? Garrett questioned Han. The king spoke coldly, wondering whether Garrett had given the order to keep Lucina away from the feast. Startled, Garrett realized she'd assumed mistakenly that Han was no longer interested in Lucina. She smiled as she considered how to make the most of the situation now. Garrett vowed that she would never treat the lady the king had selected in this way. She said the guard had misunderstood her instructions and accused him of being haughty. She gave Han her blessing to carry out the sentence. Then Han told Lucina to remain back while he carried out the execution, asking her to shut her ears and hide her eyes. He gave Chelan the command to dispose of the corpse in the Valley of Fire after murdering the guard. The king turned to Lucina, carried her, and proclaimed the feast to be over, saying he was going to take Lucina with him. He requested everybody to get out of his way. Akin requested Lucina, who was still covering her ears and closing her eyes, to open them gently as he carried her. Han was curious and inquired if she was afraid. She said that she was afraid and thanked him for what he had done. Feeling flattered, Han expressed his regret to Lucina for using too much volume when they had spoken before. He said that the delay was due to his awkward way of communicating his original intention to apologize sooner. He felt bad also about not keeping his word to see her more often. Actually, Han was afraid to go see Lucina and apologize because he thought that after spending a night with her, telling her he could die would make her hate him and want to go back to Berg. He had to postpone the visit since he was afraid he might lose her forever. Lucina abruptly cut him off and apologized for her awkward speech that had offended Han. She indicated that she wanted to apologize to Han and visit him, but she was afraid of making the same mistake again. Han calmed her, saying he didn't want to scare her with kindness. He would take her back to his castle if such were the case. He pushed her to pursue her goals and told her not to worry about offending him. When Lucina heard him speak, she reached for Han's garments and said she wanted to be with him. She did, however, acknowledge that she wasn't sure whether she was ready to give her all for him just yet. She thought that learning all there was to know about Han would enable her to decide whether or not she was prepared to make such a commitment. Han was shocked by Lucina's remarks, but he laughed, touched her face tenderly, and expressed his emotions, realizing that such actions need mutual consent. As so, he made his way inside the room. Inside, Han praised Lucina's appearance and said that he had been staring at her the whole time when she arrived at the feast. He drew near her ear and told her not to wear that clothing ever again since he didn't enjoy other people praising her for it. Hakon's face was close to hers, and when he put his arms around Lucina's waist, she turned away, and he asked whether she was okay with his contact. Lucina said that she only wanted to have a meaningful talk today, not that she didn't enjoy it. She gave her explanation, and Hakon chuckled and told her he understood. Then he went to get a bottle of wine and several glasses from a table. Han asked Lucina to sit down and ask him any questions she had as he filled each glass with wine. After a little pause, Lucina was resolved. She sipped her wine fast, as Titi had advised, and asked Han how old he was now, giving Lucina another glass. In response, Han said that, by human standards, he was presently 27 years old. Lucina asked Han about his tastes, recalling Titi's suggestion that they unite via shared preferences. Han teased that he liked Lucina, which she explained by inquiring about his interests and favorite foods. Han poured Lucina another glass, observing that she seemed to be enjoying the wine as she completed hers again. Lucina found the Teilhard wine to be calming and amazed at its intricacies and many colors as she sipped. Han walked slowly up to Lucina, said he wanted to know more about her, and proposed that they play a game. Hakon offered to play a game where they could either answer a question or take a sip of wine if they would rather not respond, as he filled Lucina's glass with wine. When Han had his chance to speak first, he asked what kind of guy Lucina specifically likes: someone who is wealthy, clever, physically fit, or charming and passionate. Lucina considered the matter, seeing that Han already had every trait she valued, but because she was too embarrassed to say it out loud, she opted to sip the wine instead. It was Lucina's turn now, and she posed the same query to Han, wanting to know what type of women he was into. In response, Han said that he admires a lady who doesn't fear him and who loves him for who he really is, not only for being a king. Then Han said it was his time to pose questions. He questioned if Lucina was actually good at conversing or whether her calmness was just a product of being in a strange place. Lucina said that in order to communicate with Han more effectively, and without being obscene, she had trained with Titi. Han gave her a pat on the head, showing her how much he appreciated her will to improve the things she thought practice could not do. He hypothesized that Lucina had once been a courageous young woman but had become timid and afraid as a result of prior experiences. Han suddenly asked Lucina whether her family had ever physically harmed her when she was younger and if she had ever thought of fleeing the castle. Lucina was hesitant to respond, thinking that Han would be offended if she told him the truth. She gestured that her request was no longer legitimate since it was now her turn to share, sensing that it was time to shift the dynamics. Lucina took the initiative to inquire about Han's sentiments after he apologized for any mistake. Han was inquisitive about Lucina. The monarch confessed his developing fondness for her, saying that his love grew stronger the more he learned. He told her that he meant no harm and that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, making her his queen. The king asked Lucina how she felt, asking to be by his side every night close to her face. After a moment of hesitation, Lucina admits that she is terrified, but she doesn't hate him. She confesses that she is uncomfortable with Han's powerful presence and worries that he would treat other women similarly. She begs him to focus his attention just on her. Han blushes, flattered by Lucina's words, and takes her hand gently in his. He holds her in his arms and gives her a kiss as she pulls her face closer. Han wants her to guarantee that she won't participate in similar behaviors with other guys. Han makes the decision to tell Lucina the truth while considering the chance to do so. He particularly shares the information about the guardian dragon that has the strongest fire energy. He says that this energy is too strong for women from other tribes, and as a result, many of them die giving birth or during pregnancy. Some even pass away during sexual relations, demonstrating the high price that the protecting dragon's power exacts. Han had originally considered eradicating every Berg resident, and had no intention of disclosing this information. But as his love for Lucina deepened, his need to tell the truth about her threatened to overtake him. Han apologizes to Lucina and acknowledges his own weakness in keeping this truth from her. He promises not to hurt her and will even return her to Berg if that is what she wants. Just as Akin is ready to ask the pivotal question concerning the possible sacrifice and danger, he discovers that Lucina has been dozing quietly the whole time. He addresses her by name and says that she has been sleeping well since his disclosure. Han gently lays Lucina down on the bed, gives her a blanket, and gives her a kind kiss on the forehead. The next day, Lucina and Hakon are said to have spent the whole night together in Hakon's chamber, indicating a possibility of intimate contact by Garrett's attendants. Hakon's room is occupied by a lady for the first time throughout the night. When Garrett hears this, she lets her feelings be known. A huge apple was waiting to be eaten into in a dream Lucina had as the sun's rays filled the room. She was shocked to wake up close to Hakon and pulled away out of reflex, wondering who had clothed her and why she had done so. She had a pounding headache, thinking back to the night before, when she had spoken to Han and spent time with him. She flushed when she saw Akin sleeping soundly, then gingerly got out of bed and made her way out. Titi and Tuan waited outside, apprehensive for Lucina's safety. Lucina surprised them all by coming out of the room, acting as if she were about to pass away. With curious questions about her health, Titi and Tulan hurried to her side. Lucina begged them not to yell, saying that her headache hurt. Lucina said that it felt like someone had stabbed her skull, making it hard for her to move, in response to Titi's worried question about if she was hurt. Tuan, doubtful, voiced his skepticism on the likelihood that Akin caused Lucina to lose her ability to walk. Titi asked Lucina how often similar occurrences happened in the meanwhile. Bewildered, Lucina figured Titi was talking about the wine she'd had, and confessed to having 3 or 4 glasses. When Titi and Tuan realized this, they both started crying with happiness, happy that Lucina had made it through the discussion despite her repeated participation. Lucina, still feeling lightheaded and unable to talk much, asked for water. Chelan urged that she look after Lucina as the dragon lineage carrier, and Titi led the way. Han made a happy humming noise within. As Chelan entered the room, she thought that Han had enjoyed and had a fantastic night because of her beaming smile. The king, intrigued, inquired jokingly whether he was gorgeous, remembering Lucina's remarks about his looks the night before. When Tuan saw Han adamantly declaring that he had the most attractive body of any dragon, he was rendered speechless. Tu wanted to know whether Lucina had really spoken such things to the king. Han nodded, acknowledging that Lucina had been amazing while they were together. The moon goddess herself, the monarch claimed, was neither more lovely than Lucina, nor as brave as a gallant warrior. Chelan praised Han on his misinterpretation of his words and urged patiently waiting for Lucina to get pregnant. The king was taken aback by Chelan's early appearance and was puzzled as to why he was there. Chelan went on to say that there were 2 more ladies in the kingdom named Brillin, and they had beautiful silver hair and eyes. One had been transported to the Temple of Brion, apart from Lucina, while the other had died away from disease. Chelan surmised that she had been abducted as a result of her special abilities being made public. Confirming that Lucina looked like the girl who had rescued him, Akin's thoughts raced. The shocking revelation that Baron Berg was not Lucina's real mother was then made by Tuan. Despite being Baron Berg's daughter, Lucina's real mother was a famous prostitute whose stunning beauty had caught King Brion's eye. But nobody knew where Lucina's biological mother lived. Tuan said that Lucina's mother was not the one King Brion intended to have as a concubine. He went on to say that Lucina had several face injuries as a result of harsh treatments she had received at a young age. It seems improbable that Lucina had received harsher treatment than a hired gun. Akin was devastated to learn this startling information and could now clearly see why Lucina always appeared afraid. Han pleaded with Tuan to keep this knowledge private. Han thought about Lucina's feelings and the embarrassment she would feel if her past were discovered. He committed himself to her happiness and wanted to shield her from any pain. Sensing Akin's worry, Chelan apologized for his audacity and brought up another crucial subject. The authorities wanted to know how the dead monarch should be buried next to his predecessors in Amzalu. They further said that Adar was maybe creating issues by dehumanizing the monarch who had passed away. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, Han moved away, but not before telling Tuan that Lucina was at the hot spring right now. Tuan proposed that Akin go there with her as it would be a chance to unwind and strike up a fresh discussion. Han nodded, blushing slightly as he realized he still had a lot to talk to her about. As Chelan stepped into the hot spring, he felt happy. Han glanced around, hoping to see Lucina anywhere. Lucina was taken aback by him and Titi, who was brushing her hair gently. She smiled as she saw Hakan and walked over to say sorry for falling asleep so quickly the night before. Han gave her a reassuring grin in return, telling her that everything was okay and how much he loved seeing her sleep soundly. Han volunteered to help dry Lucina's damp hair after seeing it. With a swift gesture of a towel, Titi told him she would wait outside. Han sat down and beckoned Lucina to sit with him. Lucina paused, perplexed because there was only one chair in use, until Hakan kindly encouraged her to perch on his lap. Lucina reluctantly accepted the request, and Han started using the towel to dry her hair. Han asked Lucina how she felt after going out to drink too much the night before, and she said that she felt better after taking a dip in the hot spring. Han was gently tilted by Lucina while he related his experience with Teilhard wine, emphasizing both its sweet flavor and the accompanying morning headache. Han pulled Lucina up against his body and said, "It's like wine," acknowledging that he missed her the moment she left his sight, and that he continued to sense her presence all day. Taken aback by Hakan's statements, Lucina spontaneously kissed him and opened herself to him, asking herself whether her experiences in Berg had made her more willing to open out. Han made the decision to stop causing her pain. He had something crucial to discuss in his room later that night. After they had returned from the hot spring together, Han gave Titi a gold coin as a token of appreciation for her efforts in helping Lucina recover her speech. Titi thanked Han, seeming surprised and appreciative. With the intention of making it a regular occurrence, he told Titi that he and Lucina would be having supper in his room tonight. Han gave Lucina a gentle kiss on the hand as he said goodbye, hoping to see her again soon. Meanwhile, Hakan asked Lucina to meals in his chamber every night, according to Garrett's staff in the Queen's court. They also told Garrett that the late king and Mal would shortly be laid to rest, implying that Garrett would not be staying in the palace for long. Considering the possibility of allowing Lucina to take over her responsibilities without opposition, Garrett shocked his attendants by giving the order to call Jill right now. Titi expressed her happiness at her able to pay for CSR's tuition expenses, and she was thrilled to get a gold coin. She complimented Lucina on her bravery and offered to help her pick a lovely costume for evening. Lucina glanced out the window and suddenly saw Foi and reward him with peanuts for his assistance. Lucina tells Foi that she no longer feels terrified and that signing the marriage deal was a wise choice since everyone is kind to her. A long-haired guy bows before Garrett with respect, treating her like the previous queen. Sitting at a table, Garrett asked her brother Gillet for assistance as she was clearly worried. She told him when Raken's corpse was supposed to be put in Mal, as determined by the priest. She was adamant that she could not remain in the palace if Rakanan departed, particularly since she had lost her kid in the murder of the young dragons. She said that she felt hopeless, particularly if Lucina was able to bear the king a child. After a period of silence, Gillet spoke out. He reminded her that although if she and Garrett were living in a low-income area, they had the tremendous pleasure of relocating to the palace. Now that the king had selected his bride, he proposed that she depart from the palace. Garrett was furious and threw a glass at his face in response before coming up to him. She recalled that she had kept an eye on him since he was a little kid, back when he was often ill. Garrett made it clear that she had taken on a variety of menial tasks in the market to tend to his ailing body in the hopes that he would find happiness in life despite the persistent danger of his impending death. She thought back to the day Gillet had assured her he would pay her back. Her brother, looking nervous, had promised to use black magic to keep their word and had accelerated them to the Queen's palace by destroying everybody who stood in their way. Then, taking hold of her brother's hair, she told him that she needed him and that he could not attempt to betray her. Her brother, shaky with terror, reassured her that he would never betray her. Is he suggesting that this role is more than Garrett could have accomplished on her own? Garrett questioned. Without him, would she be doomed to a life of misery as a dancer or a prostitute? Her brother started to shake violently and grip his chest in agony as he attempted to defend himself. Coughing fits overcame him. Her brother confirmed that he was experiencing heart problems once again when Garrett questioned, adding that he was getting more grief with each usage of black magic. Garrett emphasized that her brother had not offered to assist her since she became queen, using her sickness as a justification. She vented her annoyance at her brother, who just discussed his health while attempting to force her to leave the castle. Garrett said she had spent her whole childhood caring for her brother, who often passed out, but now it appeared he was more worried about himself than she was. Her brother pressed his palm to his chest and inquired as to what she anticipated from him. His sister smiled mischievously and moved to face the other side of the castle. Han was grumbling to himself as he considered how he would break the news to Lucina. Abruptly, Lucina, clad in an exquisite gown, walked gently toward her king. Han offered his wife a seat next to a table, smiling at the notion of his beautiful spouse, but she rushed herself into his arms and kissed him. She admitted to missing him in a whisper. After blushing, Han said he had seen her this morning, but Lucina smiled and pointed out that it was now dark. Had she rehearsed saying such things to Han? Han inquired, declaring that he wanted to talk about something significant. He was interrupted by a warrior who entered the chamber and said that Adar had returned to his insane state. Surprised, Han asked the warrior if they could move the king's body since Adar was making a fuss, and they couldn't get her to stop. Han got to his feet and advised Lucina that they, after talking about it later and feeling a little let down, Lucina made the decision to go to her room with Titi. But Titi saw Jile from a distance. When Lucina inquired about his identity, Titi revealed that he was Jile, Garrett's brother. She said that Jile was well liked by the staff members and that his attractiveness even outstripped that of his sister. Titi questioned Jile's health after seeing that he seemed to be in pain. In the meanwhile, Jile passed out in front of Lucina and Titi from heartbreak. When Lucina got close to him, she saw that his heart had stopped. She was hesitant to heal him because she thought someone could find out about her healing abilities. At last, she decided to turn Jile around. She promised Titi that she would be at his side while she requested her to get a doctor. After Titi departed, Lucina used her healing abilities and saw that no one was in the area. She saw that Jile was quite sick and questioned if his pain had been ongoing. She continued by saying there was no simple solution for this condition. He thought back on his early years and all the errors he had done with regard to his sister while he healed Jile. Despite all she had done for him, he revealed his dread of being abandoned by her, particularly after others had advised his sister to let him die. He hoped that by helping his sister, he might prolong his life as he awaited the day he would no longer be in agony. He assumed that the holy light had somehow washed away all of his transgressions when he suddenly saw that the discomfort was progressively going away. Lucina asked him how he was feeling when he opened his eyes. Astonished that she was pain-free, Jile questioned if she was a saint. He was clueless as to what had transpired. Though he turned to Lucina to inquire whether she had cured him, he was feeling like his heart was stopped and that this was the end. Startled, Lucina gave a negative response and added that she hadn't done anything. Jile highlighted that Lucina's modest gesture was all it took to relieve this heart anguish. Even the medications given by his sister Garrett were ineffective. Grabbing Lucina's hand, he inquired as to if she had healing abilities. When Lucina was being questioned in a panic, he said that he had heard that she was from Brion, and that there were stories that the Holy Monarch of Brion had the ability to bring someone who was about to die back to life. If all of these tales were real, he questioned Lucina. But Lucina retreated, saying that she was merely reluctant to leave Jile alone himself in his thoughts, and that she had just remained here waiting for Titi's return. Jile said that the only way to end this suffering quickly would be to call upon the holy might of the Bronze Priestesses. Assuming that the king's wife had concealed her power from the start, he pointed out that he was unaware of it. Then he informed Lucina that by only marrying into the dragon tribe, she was squandering her potential. He suggested that the two of them flee the palace together and offered to assist her escape. But Lucina shot back, saying she really wanted to marry Han. Jile helped her realize that seeking to become queen would be pointless if she ran the chance of dying. Even if she stayed the night with the king, he said, she would still be at risk of dying. He stated that if she became pregnant with a dragon protector's kid, she may have a terrible death, experiencing excruciating anguish throughout her body. Although Gil pointed out that Lucina was unaware of this fact, she was astonished to hear these disclosures. He supposed the king had kept this information from her. Hadar, meantime, was pointing a weapon at someone on the other side of the palace. Ryan was marked by the warriors' refusal to allow the monarch be buried. The warriors surmised that Raken was killed by Adar's sword. Hadar underlined that Raken was not dead, but rather that he was only sleeping and would awaken shortly. Abruptly, Iken came in and requested his mother to stop worrying and to give Raken some space. Hadar, however, claimed that if Han's elder brother had passed away, it was his responsibility. The priest shot back, claiming that the assassins who were ordered to murder the dragons were to blame. Hadar maintained that Han had approached and stabbed his brother to death. Lucina, on the other hand, questioned if Han had lied to her. In response, Jile said that sleeping with a dragon guardian put a lady at danger of dying in excruciating agony. It would hurt so much when she died, even if she made it out alive by accident. He made Lucina aware that the reason she didn't think it odd that he had stolen the daughter of someone who had disgraced Mezalk to Taylard was because the king had originally planned to have her killed. Hatter struck out at her own son, saying that Han had ultimately killed him because he was so full of envy for his brother. Adar was taken prisoner by the warriors, and one of them summoned the priest to treat the king with holy water. Shaken by his mother's remarks, Han thought back to the day she had fondly stroked his head and softly reprimanded him, imploring him not to follow his brother's lead mindlessly. According to his brother Ryan, if he were to pass away, he would want Hakon to take his position on the battlefield and vanquish the adversary. Hatter shot back, claiming Han was still just a little toddler. Ryan reminded her that he had previously vanquished the Wolf tribe's chief at his age. Hatter walked up to her kid, kissing his face and telling him he was unique, that he was the great king who had brought Teard together. Turning back to the present, the priest noted that the wound was not too deep. One of the warriors said this cave was a sacred site with healing powers. He reasoned that King Han would heal fast if he spent some time in the cave. But Han got up and demanded to be left by himself. Lucina, meanwhile, sobbed as she couldn't accept that Han was taking advantage of her. Taking a tissue, she asked Han an inquiry. Gillet proposed that the monarch would withhold the truth from her. She had been taken against her will to the Teard realm by him. Given that she didn't know Gillet and that he may lie, Lucina said that she didn't trust him. Silently, she left to join her husband, Han. She said she wanted to talk to him about what had occurred, but she also knew he was hurt. She asked him what had transpired and recommended that the king see the priest about his wounds. Han, on the other hand, told her icily that he didn't feel like talking to her just now and asked her to go back to her room, saying they would speak about it later. Lucina continued anyhow, worried about Han's gash. The monarch made it plain that he wasn't willing to talk when she offered to mend the wound. Lucina, however, put her arms around Han and indicated that she would cure him since he had something essential to confide in her. Han gave her the command to go, unwavering. Lucina, sad, took solace in Titi, assuming something significant had happened. Titi told her that the priest had gone to Cossack to cleanse Raken's remains. Titi agreed with Lucina's statement that she needed time alone. Gillet showed enduring this introspection to ask her what she thought about his proposition. He saw that the king and Lucina's conversation had veered off course. Lucina did neither affirm or deny having a healing ability when questioned about keeping it a secret. Gillet surmised, highlighting the power's invaluable worth, that she concealed it to stay out of trouble. He said she could have saved herself from death while giving birth to the king's kid if she had had such ability. Gillet was forbidden by Lucina to discuss Han without hesitation once she realized that, in spite of the facts, Gillet always sided with the king. Gillet asked her how she felt about Han, but she flushed and said it didn't matter to him. What did she enjoy about Han? He questioned her next. Lucina described how Han told her she was cute and gorgeous, and he listened to her without passing judgment. Gillet came up to her and said he could say things like that with ease. Recalling how she had rescued him while he was on the verge of death, he told her how charming and gorgeous she was. He held out his hand, urging her to join him, promising to shield her from any effort to coerce or sell her. In the meanwhile, Han, overcome with melancholy, turned to drink for solace. A warrior brought news of Garrett's arrival to the king, but Han, enraged, reminded him that he had previously declared his desire to be left alone. Looking around, Tuan asked whether he was also unwelcome. Han was curious, so she asked him why he was there. Tuan drew attention to the fact that Han had left his therapy early and that his wound had not fully healed. Han cut him off, saying that their dragon clan didn't die from scrapes. Tuan acknowledged, however, that the potential for death from a dragon assassin's black arrow put their kingdom's unity in jeopardy. Unaware of Tulin's true intentions, the king proposed that if he didn't want to send his mother to the Valley of Fire, he should put her in jail. Chelan clarified that she had dishonored the late monarch Ryan for 10 years and threatened the monarch with death. He emphasized that action was required to placate the ministers. Han responded angrily, yelling that it was his mother and seemed to go insane. Chelan stuck to his plan, highlighting the fact that Adar could no longer be a mother and that Han needed to make a clear choice. With a blade raised, Han gave Tuan an order to leave and threatened to cut him in two if he disobeyed. Tan departed the room with a bow. Han thought back to his mother's statement that he had murdered Raken to overthrow him out of jealousy. He said he thought his mother may be happy today if he had passed away instead of Ryan. He fell on the opposite side, tears streaming down his face. Gillet praised Lucina's grace and elegance, remembering how she had kept him from dying. He reached out to entice her to follow him, offering to shield her from any effort to coerce or sell her. But, engrossed in her thoughts, Lucina was emotionless in spite of Gillet's praise. On the other hand, when Akin gave her a compliment, she said that it was enough to make her world spin. She got up then, saying that she had to see Han because she had to, not because she wanted to, and that she had noticed that he was bleeding when she had seen him the previous time. Hadar, meantime, cried from within the closed chamber that Han had murdered Rakan with an arrow. Her eyes snapped to a stuffed animal lying on the ground. She grabbed it and held it, recalling that Han had taken a chance on her life and pursued her brother to save him. She realized the truth. Ryan had kept his word and died defending his brother. She asked to be allowed out by the guards so she could apologize to her kid after coming to her senses. Garrett commended Jilai for using black magic to trick Hadar into having hallucinations. She stressed that Han would likely not visit Ryan's corpse for a while since the king's mother had accused him of murder. Jilai, intrigued, reported that the ministers had recommended that Adar be put to death and sent to the Valley of Fire. He said that he didn't think Adar would really die. But Garrett questioned his newfound fear, pointing out that she had already banished a number of individuals from the palace. Even though she had accused him of murder, she pointed out that the monarch could never kill his own mother. A sly smirk spread over Garrett's face, as if she could see how she might profit from this. Lost in his reverie, the king became aware that his badly gushing wound prevented him from moving. Remembering the previous time he had been hurt in the middle of the forest 10 years before, he dreaded losing his position as Teilhard's last dragon defender. He dialed for assistance in his panic. When Lucina suddenly came in, she saw Han laying on the floor with a fever from his wound. She didn't know what Han really wanted from her, but she didn't want to see him suffer. She wiped the king's tears and thought back to her youth, the last time she had rescued a dragon. After healing Han, Lucina departed. Han woke up, wondering whether he had dreamed as the light from the sun streamed into the room. When he saw that his wound had healed, Tulan and the priest were getting ready to go inside the king's room. But Han was already on his way out. When Tuan asked how he was doing, he said that he had gone with the priest to have his wound treated but that it had already healed. The priest responded negatively to Han's question about whether he had come to treat him the night before, saying that this was the first time he had seen him since leaving the sacred site. When Han asked Tuan whether he may apply holy water as he slept, Tuan gave a negative response as well. Han was perplexed as to why a black arrow wound would heal up so rapidly. The priest clarified that the bleeding had ceased as soon as the king left the sacred area, and that the cut was not particularly deep. He also said that Han's body could heal fast since he was the dragon protector. But Han did ask the guard whether anybody had gone into his room the night before. The guard said Lucina had paid them a quick visit. Han was taken aback to discover it wasn't a dream. When he inquired about Lucina's whereabouts, he learned that she was on the other side of the palace. Adar's voice fascinated the guards, who wondered whether she was sleeping in the meanwhile. They unlocked the door, worried to see that Adar had escaped through the window. The guards preferred her to remain incarcerated and questioned how she could be so energetic at her age. Concerned about Lucina's depressed condition, Titi sent her a book on Teilhard's and the dragon tribe's history, implying that Lucina needed to be familiar with it as the future queen of Teilhard. When Lucina opened the book, she saw that it was empty of any writing. She said she couldn't read and that Baroness Berg hadn't ever taught her. Titi was questioned by Lucina whether she could read. Titi acknowledged the old writing of the dragon tribe and said that each tribe in Teilhard employed a separate set of characters. But she also acknowledged that she was unable to assist Lucina since she was not proficient in that writing. Lucina was disappointed when she heard a voice and saw Hadar coming inside. Lucina moved closer, seeing Hadar seemed to be having difficulty walking. Hadar said that she had come to get her kid and that she was not Rita. She abruptly spotted the book and acknowledged that she had written it for her boys. She clarified that this book was how her son Oki had learnt to read. Hadar surprised Lucina and Titi by offering to assist them. Lost in meditation, Han noticed that if Lucina had cured him, it would mean that she was the same girl he had met 10 years before. He suggested that Lucina may have concealed her healing ability in order to prevent problems, and he questioned why she hadn't utilized it when wrongly accused of Variul. He remembered Tuan expressing sadness 10 years earlier that he was unable to bring him to Teilhard, highlighting his value to the kingdom. He came to the conclusion that the kid who had cured him was Lucina. When he entered Lucina's room, his heart began to rush. He heard his mother, Adar, speaking to him suddenly. He opened the door carefully and saw his mother instructing Lucina. It had been 10 years since he had last seen his mother's warm smile, and he was amazed, wondering if he was dreaming. Reminding Adar that she was Lucina and not Oki, Lucina said. But when Lucina asked Hadar why she was trying to find Oki, Hadar didn't seem to recall. As Han came in, he asked his mother why she was in the room and said that she belonged in KIC. Speaking up, Lucina said that Hadar had previously come to assist her and that she was now teaching him to read. She emphasized her politeness by asking Han whether he knew her. With tears in her eyes, Hadar said she had come to meet her son. Hadar expressed regret to Han for hurting him. Han looked at the situation, worried about his mother's depression. Lucina was baffled as to why Adar was expressing regret to Han. Hadar turned to face Lucina, but she didn't hear him ask for an explanation. A servant in another area of the palace told Queen Garrett that Cassie's window had been opened per her command, letting Hadar go. The servant went on, saying she'd seen Hadar go from the apartment into the secondary palace. Garrett was concerned that the king was on his way to the second palace as well, and she pondered how she would handle the situation if Han ran into Hadar. Garrett calmed himself enough to go into Gila's room and inquire if he was ready. Gila shuddered and spoke about Adar's fragile mental condition, stressing that putting a spell on her may make things worse. Gila claimed that Adar had opposed her marriage to Han and had even attempted to have her expelled from the queen's castle after Garrett touched her brother's forehead. Garrett threatened him, saying that she would use her own hands to stop him if Hadar came to her senses. She asked her brother, who was pushing her, whether he wanted to watch Hadar die that way. As she started the ceremony and added the potion to the mixture, Gila imagined Hadar and Hakon conversing across the distance. Hadar had a dream that was unsettling in which Lucina attempted to assassinate Han while she was staring at Lucina. Tormented, she rushed Lucina, threatening to murder her with a pen. Han, meanwhile, reached out in astonishment, attempt to grasp his paralyzed mother. Then, worried about his wife's health, he grabbed the pen out of Adar's hands and threw it to the ground before going over to Lucina. Han saw that Lucina had a bruise on her face. Hadar threatened to murder Lucina and urged her son not to approach her, saying she would kill him. Feeling threatened, Han drew Lucina closer to him in an attempt to shield her. Han summoned the guards to arrest his mother out of rage. Lost in his reverie, he recalled his brother Raken telling him that, in spite of his mother's allegations and treatment of him as a traitor, she now desired retribution on Han's closest allies. He gave his men the command to send her to the Valley of Fire while sobbing, threatening to punish her harshly. He accused the guards of failing to keep a careful eye on Hadar, which resulted in Lucina's wounds, and requested Titi to get the priest to tend to his wife. He pledged that anything like would never occur again. Chilin questioned the king a few minutes later about whether or not he had really banished his mother to the Valley of Fire. In response, the monarch said that if the person who had endangered the final dragon guardian vanished, the ministers should feel secure. He said that Tear's rule would be followed and that anybody attempting to harm the king or his wife would be banished to the Valley of Fire. Chilan said that if Lucina found out that someone in the royal family had been put to death because of her, she could become upset. Akin intervened, telling her not to know the truth and threatening to punish everyone in the palace for not speaking. Gila, buried in meditation, pondered if the adverse effects of the black magic had caused him to lose consciousness. When he begged for answers regarding what had transpired during his slumber, the two servants who were aware of his presence remained silent. Lucina abruptly reached for Gile's clothing and said she needed to talk to him. She remembered Titi's effort to find out what was going on with Hadar from other servants, but none responded, saying the king had told them not to speak. Gilet was questioned by Lucina whether he knew who the monarch had given the order to send to the Valley of Fire. Gilet was perplexed and took a while to realize what she meant. When he made the connection, he understood Lucina was referring to Adar. Sickened, Gila said nothing in his contemplations, lamenting the king's senseless decision to execute his mother. He hardly answered any of Lucina's urgent queries. As the king emerged, he overheard Lucina and Gila conversing. He questioned Gila, giving her a chilly look, what he was doing with his wife. Gilet and Lucina were frantic. The king hurried up to Gilet, snatching his garments, and asked if he wanted to die and why he had touched Lucina. The king was informed by Lucina that his first assessment was incorrect. The monarch, filled with rage, questioned Gilet about his words to his spouse. Once again, Lucina stepped in, pushing Han and assuring him it wasn't what he thought. She invited Gilet to come talk to her alone. Gilet complied. She questioned Akin if he didn't want her to know that he had selected a lady from another country, and that she may die if she stayed the night with him. Perhaps he hadn't informed her because he was afraid she would leave him after finding out. Han retorted that he hadn't done anything on purpose and that he hadn't planned to keep the facts from her. He made it clear that he wanted to discuss it with her for a very long time. Han was saddened to see Lucina weep. Han attempted to stop Lucina as she brushed away her tears and turned away. Lucina informed him that she was done talking to him about it. After she left, Han expressed his anguish and said that he had given up on a number of relationships in the past and had grown used to letting them go and forgetting them. But he couldn't understand why he suffered so much from Lucina's rejection because she was the first to treat him so kindly and lovingly, seeing him for who he was rather than just as a king. He also said that Lucina was the dream he had cherished since he was a child, and that he had fallen in love to the point where he started to believe that he could accomplish what he had previously thought was impossible. While traveling, Lucina saw Gillett calling out to her. She asked him how he was doing, to which he replied, "Do you intend to heal him with your powers?" Lucina hesitated, and Gillett laughed, telling her that it was a joke and that they could be beheaded if the king found them. Gillett then asked Lucina to assist him in saving Hadar, but Lucina didn't know who he was referring to, so she asked who he meant, to which he replied, "The old woman who was taken to the valley," describing her as Han's mother. Lucina was surprised and wondered if the king intended to kill Han's mother. Lucina asked what the plan was, and Gillett replied that they would have to enter the Valley of Fire, asking for Lucina's assistance. Gillett explained that since she had given birth to the children of a dragon protector, she would probably be locked in the fire prison instead of being thrown into the Valley of Fire. He emphasized that given Hadar's age, she probably wouldn't survive long. After returning to the room, Lucina asked Fuka to assist them. Startled, he informed her that it would be dangerous, but Lucina cut him short, asking him to speak quietly so as not to wake Titi. Two guards made sure the Valley of Fire entrance was secure, and Lucina and Fua hid behind the trees. Lucina, with her face hidden by a black cloak, remembered Gillet's words, stating that this key would allow her to reach the fire prison. Gillett had mentioned that while it would be difficult to neutralize the soldiers stationed there, the real challenge would be the chief prison guard, which would require locating his room in order to put him to sleep. Fua was perplexed as to why Lucina was putting herself in danger for someone she hardly knew, but Lucina answered that she didn't want Hadar to die, adding that she wasn't doing it for herself but for Han, and that she was offering honey peanuts to Fua every day in exchange for his assistance, which Fua gladly accepted, asking her to keep her promise, and then glancing at the guard. Assuming that this was the moment when he should doze off, as Gillett had suggested, Lucina took advantage of the guard's incapacitation during their conversation to slip past and enter the Valley of Fire. Climbing the stairs, she peered into the distance and deduced that Hadar must be at the level of the pillars. The higher she climbed, the more intense the heat grew. Taking a quick look at the guard in the distance, she assumed that Gillett had already put him to sleep. Moving on stealthily, she noticed Hadar incarcerated in the distance. Using the key to try and open the cell, she touched Hadar's forehead and discovered that she was unconscious and that her body was warm. Offering to move Hadar to a cool spot, Lucina carried her on her back and asked Fua to assist in giving Hadar water while she took care of healing her. With her healing abilities, Lucina recalled Gillett's explanation. Given her age, Quadar was unlikely to survive the whole day in the Prison of Fire, where she had been condemned to spend one day. Gillett had advised Lucina to support her through to the very end. Lucina saw that Hadar's condition did not get better in spite of her attempts. Is that because of her age? She pondered. Fua heard the Guardian yell out as she suddenly realized that it had woken up. She turned and saw the Sentinel standing behind them. Gila gave him salt to blind the main Guardian, recalling Gillet's admonitions to use cautious in case he woke up, which probably meant he had lost consciousness as a result of his heart condition. The Guardian, meanwhile, hurried over to Lucina. While Lucina ran, Fuka utilized his power to render the Guardian immobile. After breaking free from the plants, the Guardian shoved Fua and Lucina, who claimed to feel lightheaded. Is it because Lucina used her abilities too much? She pondered. When she spun around, she saw the Guardian's hand coming at her. She was terrified and worried that this was the place where she would die when all of a sudden there was a tremendous roar and a brilliant light. With one hand, Han repelled the Guardian's onslaught as he stepped in front of them. Astonished to find Han here, he gave the Guardian the command to go back to his location. A huge apple was waiting to be eaten into in a dream Lucina had as the sun's rays filled the room. She was shocked to wake up close to Hakan and pulled away out of reflex, wondering who had clothed her and why she had done so. She had a pounding headache, thinking back to the night before, when she had spoken to Han and spent time with him. She flushed when she saw Akin sleeping soundly, then gingerly got out of bed and made her way out. Titi and Tuan waited outside, apprehensive for Lucina's safety. Lucina surprised them all by coming out of the room, acting as if she were about to pass away. With curious questions about her health, Titi and Tulan hurried to her side. Lucina begged them not to yell, saying that her headache hurt. Lucina said that it felt like someone had stabbed her skull, making it hard for her to move, in response to Titi's worried question about if she was hurt. Tuan, doubtful, voiced his skepticism on the likelihood that Akin caused Lucina to lose her ability to walk. Titi asked Lucina how often similar occurrences happened in the meanwhile. Bewildered, Lucina figured Titi was talking about the wine she'd had and confessed to having 3 or 4 glasses. When Titi and Tuan realized this, they both started crying with happiness, happy that Lucina had made it through the discussion despite her repeated participation. Lucina, still feeling lightheaded and unable to talk much, asked for water. Chelan urged that she look after Lucina as the dragon lineage carrier, and Titi led the way. Han made a happy humming noise within. As Chelan entered the room, she thought that Han had enjoyed and had a fantastic night because of her beaming smile. The king, intrigued, inquired jokingly whether he was gorgeous, remembering Lucina's remarks about his looks the night before. When Tuan saw Han adamantly declaring that he had the most attractive body of any dragon, he was rendered speechless. Tu wanted to know whether Lucina had really spoken such things to the king. Han nodded, acknowledging that Lucina had been amazing while they were together. The moon goddess herself, the monarch claimed, was neither more lovely than Lucina, nor as brave as a gallant warrior. Chelan praised Han on his misinterpretation of his words and urged patiently waiting for Lucina to get pregnant. The king was taken aback by Chelan's early appearance and was puzzled as to why he was there. Chelan went on to say that there were 2 more ladies in the kingdom named Brillin, and they had beautiful silver hair and eyes. One had been transported to the Temple of Brion, apart from Lucina, while the other had died away from disease. Chelan surmised that she had been abducted as a result of her special abilities being made public. Confirming that Lucina looked like the girl who had rescued him, Akin's thoughts raced. The shocking revelation that Barenberg was not Lucina's real mother was then made by Tuan. Despite being Barenberg's daughter, Lucina's real mother was a famous prostitute whose stunning beauty had caught King Brion's eye. But nobody knew where Lucina's biological mother lived. Lucina said that she would be prepared to sacrifice her life in order to have a child with Han, highlighting her love for him. She spoke of her desire to become Tear's queen and bear the king a child. She walked carefully up to Han and planted a kiss on his lips as they looked at one another. Lucina gave Han a hug and another kiss. Han abruptly shoved Lucina aside and commanded her to stop talking. Nodding affirmatively, Lucina realized she was taking a chance on her life by staying the night with him. She pointed out that other ladies, like Adar and Garrett, had given birth successfully after spending the night with prior kings. Despite the risk, Lucina said that she could do it too, maybe even more effortlessly because of her ability to heal. She stepped forward to project Han onto the bed. Surprised, Han thought on Lucina's attractiveness in silence. Lucina, in the meanwhile, moved her hands over Han's body, stroking him lightly as she got close to his waist. Han abruptly jumped up and asked her to wait, embarrassed. Lucina was warned by Han not to take the issue lightly, and he made it clear that he was not prepared to lose her. He spoke about how shocked he was to see her in the Valley of Fire, and how he couldn't bear to think of her passing. Taking Lucina in his arms, he begged her to see things from his point of view. Lucina, however, was hesitant to give Han access to her healing abilities. She informed him that she wouldn't want to have children with other women. Recognizing this, Han proposed that they first assess Lucina's health, bringing up her episodes of fainting that she had experienced in the Valley of Fire and at their first encounter. He emphasized the added risk if she wasn't in better shape. Lucina acknowledged that her body was delicate, particularly when she used her healing ability. After a little while, the priest revealed that while she didn't have much energy, she was really suffering from some nutritional deficits from her background. The priest recommended more testing since Tailard and Brillin bodies vary from one another. Lucina reluctantly acknowledged that the Baroness was not her actual mother and that she was an illegitimate kid. This knowledge would, she worried, destroy their marriage. Han unlocked the door, reassuring Lucina that he would never abandon her. He also expressed regret for keeping the truth about the dragon's protection and the possibility of dying while giving birth hidden. He leaned in close to Lucina and made a vow never to keep anything from her ever again. Han kissed Lucina tenderly to encapsulate their pledge, making her flush. Hadar, sleeping in bed on the other side of the palace, opened her eyes to see a warrior not far away. She had recovered rapidly, the warrior said, clearly beaming, proving that fire was genuinely in her corner. But worried, Hadar remembered her delusions and sprang from her bed, realizing it was the Black Mage's work. She said that she had something significant to tell the warrior, and urged him to give her son Han a call immediately. Han understood that his mother did not hold him responsible for the passing of his brother Ryan. Quite the reverse, she felt bad, believing that Ryan had died as a result of her wanting to shield his younger brother. Han thanked Lucina for assisting him in realizing his mother's actual motivations. Embarrassed, Lucina eventually worked up the nerve to ask Hakan to take her. But given her physical condition, Hakan reminded her of the priest's advice. Since she hadn't set foot on the earth all day, Lucina emphasized that she could still walk. To discuss an important matter, Han rushed to Adar's room but found her asleep. Garrett, present in the room, explained that Adar had dozed off after taking her medication. Concerned about his mother's health, Han questioned Garrett, who explained that Adar's recovery would take longer than expected. Garrett expressed the desire to take care of Adar at the Queen's palace, acknowledging that she had not fulfilled her responsibilities to Adar as the former queen. Meanwhile, a warrior alerted the king that Hadar had woken up and wanted to speak with him. Adar proposed that they welcome Adar to the secondary palace, but Garrett, coldly, reminded them of the custom in which the former queen looks after the reigning queen, stressing that even though Lucina had been here for a while, she still needed to learn royal manners. Han, seeing Lucina, replied to Garrett that it was never too late to learn, suggesting that Garrett teach her the royal rules once she moved into the palace and after she gave birth to his child. Hakan promised to send Lucina books on Teilhard's culture and law, encouraging her to ask questions if she didn't understand. Under Garrett's threatening stare, Lucina admitted to Hakan, with some embarrassment, that she was illiterate. Lucina instinctively drew nearer to Hakan, who reassured her that the books were written in the continental language, not Teilhard. A warrior interrupted the king, telling him that the ministers were awaiting the tribe meeting. Hakan left Lucina, promising to see her again that evening. Lucina worriedly heard Gillet's voice, noticing her worried expression. Gillet asked about her health, remembering that she had fainted during the Chief Guardian's awakening in the Valley of Fire. Gillet, accustomed to such occurrences, inquired about Lucina's health as well. She had fainted in the valley. Discouraged, Lucina replied that it frequently occurred when she overused her healing power. Astonished, Gillet mentioned that while the Kamer's sacred powers were well known for their capacity to heal, he had never heard of such adverse effects. He asked Lucina where her power came from, but she was clueless. She confessed she had concealed it for fear of being mistreated. After considering Han's words, Lucina affirmed that her husband would not betray her. Gillet, skeptical, called her naive, pointing out that if Han discovered her power, he might use it in war. Lucina, determined, replied that she would be happy as long as she stayed by his side. Gillet warned her about the consequences if the truth came out, suggesting people would seek her powers and if she refused, she would be threatened. Gillet was frustrated, unable to understand her attachment to Han. Lucina just explained that she did what she wanted. He reasoned that she must have fallen in love with Hakan because he was the first to show her kindness, and that if he had been the first to know Lucina, she would have fallen in love with him as well. Blushing as he looked at her, he insisted on the necessity of hiding her power in order to prevent war and protect Han. Gillet was taken aback at Lucina's worry, and she replied that Han had sent her books on the kingdom's customs, but she was illiterate. Concerned, Gillet volunteered to assist her learn to read. He was shocked and thrilled that Gillet consented to teach Lucina, referring to her as a genius when she said that Gillet had acquired all the characters on the continent by the age of 15. Having mastered the common language at the age of 6. Gillet astounded Titi, and Lucina found solace in her remarks. Titi seemed to be envious of Lucina's distinction. Titi was asked by Lucina whether she wanted to go on with her studies. Titi, looking a little guilty, said that she hadn't had time to study since she had to pay for her sister's tuition. Then Lucina proposed that Titi come to her courses. Titi was ecstatic as she gave Lucina a hug and acknowledged that being Lucina's servant was the correct decision. Gillet, who was thankful that Lucina had received assistance with her reading, thought back to Lucina's joyful expression. He blushed and said that it wouldn't be as hard to teach her to read. He figured he would be able to get out of the palace eventually if he hung around with someone who could heal. He went on to say that this was the reason he had entered the room and accepted the proposal. Gillet found Garrett seated next to Adar. Garrett requested her attendants to go so they could talk. Gillet asked Garrett about Adar's visit to the Queen's palace, curious. In a chilly response, Garrett clarified that the current queen should be looked for by her predecessor in accordance with royal custom. Gillet was perplexed as to why Garrett, who had not adhered to procedure in the past, was now obeying it. Garrett went on to tell her brother that Adar was back on his feet. She disclosed that Adar had created a disturbance by asserting that there was a black magician present in the palace and that he intended to notify Han. Gillet gasped. Normally, Garrett said, her brother's dark magic created illusions, but once they vanished, nobody would ever recall them. She underlined that most individuals were unable to understand the circumstances, believing they were becoming insane and ultimately leaving permanently. Garrett mentioned Adar's acquired immunity and said he was surprised that she had survived for 10 years without leaving the palace, remembering what he had done to her. Gillet's eyes showed worry, a fear that one day their deeds will be uncovered. Garrett reassured Gillet, saying she'd discovered drugs to relax the elderly, making them sleepy and unable of thinking clearly. She intended to use black magic to break the spell by giving them to Hadar every day. Then she said that she was going to assault Lucina, to which Gillet instantly became enraged. Garrett said her brother would make up justifications, such as heartbreak. Gillet retorted that he was unsure whether his magic affected Brillin humans in the same way, and that he may be suspicious if Lucina recalled the illusions and talked to Han. Garrett conceded that her brother was correct and that she would give it some thought. Shallan told the king that the meeting had gone long on the opposite side of the palace. Concerned, Han questioned if Hadar had received a good escort to the queen's palace. Shallan soothed Han, telling him that Adar had silently followed Garrett. Han expressed relief and said that Adar had not shown any indications of going insane since she had departed. Shallan speculated that Adar's decision to remain close to her son's body may have contributed to the crisis. Shallan asked Han how things were going with the old king's corpse burial at Emzalek. Han clarified that because of the negative omen connected to the king's injuries sustained at the ritual in the hallowed location, the ministers had chosen to postpone their decision until the birth of a new dragon guardian. With a grin, Shallan recommended staying longer at the secondary palace. Han wondered aloud whether Lucina would be able to give birth to a healthy kid and wanted to wait to find out the outcome of her physical. The priest entered abruptly, signaling that she had the test results. Lucina wanted to talk to Han about her medical findings. Gila, meantime, was pleased with Tidi's rapid learning speed and predicted that she may pick up the common language in only 1 week. He did point out, however, that Lucina ran the danger of taking much longer to learn than expected since she only answered 1 out of every 10 questions correctly. Tidi gave Lucina encouragement, pointing out that this was her first time learning to read and predicting that she will become better soon. Gila estimated that Lucina may become proficient in the common language in about a month, which is a typical amount of time for regular individuals. Gillet let go of the leaves, and Tidi volunteered to help her pick them up. There was something in there, Lucina said, scratching her eye. Gillet stepped forward, startled to see Han watching them. Enraged, Han questioned Gillet and Lucina about their whereabouts. Gillet remembered the previous time the king had caught them, and they were both taken aback. Tidi stopped Lucina as she was trying to explain, telling the king that Lucina only had dust in her eyes and that Gillet was offering to assist blow it out. Tidi interrupted Lucina's stammer to explain that Gillet was teaching them how to read. She continued by saying that she went to Gillet for assistance since Lucina was illiterate, and the monarch had promised them books. Tidi made it clear that Lucina and Gillet did not have romantic sentiments for one another. Lucina drew nearer to Akan, telling him he was the one guy she loved. Lucina stated not being able to read, and Akan, clutching her, realized he hadn't paid attention since he had assumed she already knew the common language instead of the Teard tribe's language. Han stroked Lucina's head, glad that someone with intelligence had asked for assistance. Then Han asked Gillet whether he might give his wife the responsibility of teaching him to read. In a kind reply, Gillet said he would do his hardest to help Lucina become fluent in the common tongue in less than a month. Han highlighted that no one in the palace was smarter than Gillet, even with his congenital defects, lack of fighting experience, cunning, and arrogance. Whispering that he wouldn't dare consider the repercussions if he touched Lucina again, he threatened Gillet. Gila felt her terror take hold. Han announced that the class was ended as he turned to face Lucina. Lifting his wife, he said he would go with her to the secondary palace and left, lost in contemplation. Recalling what Lucina had said about Han, Gila surmised that if he weren't the king, Han wouldn't draw attention. Gillet was baffled as to why she felt such intense affection for him. As he walked inside the room, he saw Garrett. Han, meantime, told Lucina that the findings of her medical checkup had been sent by the priest, adding that something odd had been noted. Han noted that Lucina was healing astonishingly quickly even with her lack of food and energy. Lucina surmised that maybe it was because of her ability to heal. Han said Lucina might absorb the fire's energy if she swiftly recovered her strength. Lucina voiced worries about her health, wondering whether her healing skill might help her. Han comforted Lucina, telling her that the priest would make a medication that she would take for 2 months to regain her strength. Han underlined that he would use medication to control his desires and that her prosperous period will start in 2 months. Lucina, not knowing what a prosperous time was, inquired about explanations. According to Han, the fire energy became greater during this period, increasing the likelihood of conception for members of the dragon tribe. The priest gave her advice to play with Lucina's hair in order to practice for controlling her urges. Han said that after the session, they would evaluate her condition and determine whether or not to stay the night together. Lucina agreed, but she questioned how much authority the king really needed. She said she didn't want to sleep alone for 2 months and that she wanted to sleep with him, remembering the last time she'd fallen asleep in his room. Lucina reiterated that it would be little more like sleeping, and Han reddened. Han concurred. Later, Han seemed uncomfortable in the same bed, while Lucina seemed content to lie beside him. Lucina stepped forward to put her hands around Han's arm, causing confusion in the air. Then she requested if she might take Hakon's hand, and he said yes with obvious excitement. When Lucina said that she wanted to offer him a delicate kiss, Hakon hesitated for a time and prayed to his ancestors for strength to go through this terrible suffering. After a lengthy kiss, Han decided to give Lucina a kiss. The two looked at one another expectantly. Spurred on by this intense emotion, Han turned Lucina towards him, but he recoiled involuntarily, thinking maybe it would be best if they slept in separate rooms for the next 2 months. His emphasis on the need of upholding abstinence to the letter caused misunderstanding after perplexity. Han made the bold choice to forego kissing one another throughout this time of abstinence. Lucina was shocked and asked Han for an explanation. Han said he couldn't help but kiss after that. She was disappointed and said maybe they could sleep together, holding hands. Han politely declined, highlighting the official ban on sharing a room. Determined but also heartbroken at not being able to hold her husband's hand or give him a kiss for these 2 months, Lucina sadly declined. Thinking back to their recent times together, Han offered to tie Lucina up with a rope after seeing that she was crying. He gave her a rope after looking through the drawers. Taking the rope, Lucina bound Han's arms. Han assured her that she was free to do as she pleased. She chose to shut her eyes as she walked up to him and pressed her lips to his. Gillet, on the other hand, found it incomprehensible that his sister Garrett wanted him to enchant the monarch. Hakon may be the king of Teard, but he was still a Telardian first and foremost, Garrett said. Gillet underlined that it may be hazardous, pointing out that there was a chance the king's peculiar actions might throw the whole palace into disarray. Though he was aware that he may be caught, Garrett reassured him that she would make sure no one found out. She said that the priest had given her the start and end dates of Han's prosperous era. She clarified that the dragon tribe members were unstable at this time and that the power of fire had strengthened their aggressive nature. She also mentioned that mishaps may occur even if the king took medication. Garrett held out a dish and said the ministers would lose patience if Lucina vanished by mistake. Explaining that the ministers would order Han to marry her, she set down the dish. She went over to her brother and explained that if Han accidentally murdered his own wife, it would weaken him and make their approach easier, assuring him that it would be the last time she sought assistance. She forced her brother Gillet to kneel and urged him to perform a spell on Han. She said she would assign him a servant and would assist him in leaving the palace and going anywhere he desired. It was time for him to come out of the shadows and go to the skies, she urged him. Han and Lucina, on the opposite side of the castle, shared loving looks while sharing a passionate kiss. Lucina observed the king. Breathe harder when you contact his body. His heart was thumping quicker, she observed. Her suggestion to halt was met by an enthused Han who let go of the rope and projected Lucina into the bed. Cinching his hand tightly, he thought of how beautiful her face was, how her eyes shone with longing. And Hakon tried not to weep but let out a wail. He turned around and summoned the guards, telling them to bring an iron chain that was stronger than any dragon could withstand. Lucina gave this suggestion a grin. Han clarified that holding back too much may kill him. Gilly thought of a better idea in the meantime and proposed talking to his sister about it. Lost in contemplation, Gillet knew that if she cast a spell on the king, Lucina would be in danger. He clarified that if he passed out after enchanting Han, the spell's effects would end and Han would recall his delusions and become cognizant again, much like Hadar. Gila then suggested using a candle that had been infused with his blood to make sure the spell would continue to work even after he passed out. When Garrett questioned him about why he hadn't utilized it earlier, Gillet walked over to his sister and said something in a whisper that made her grin. Foy asked what had transpired between Lucina and the king that evening on the opposite side of the palace. He questioned Lucina whether she had truly bound Han with iron chains, and she said yes. This made Foy chuckle as she envisioned the event and continued to eat his peanuts. Foy emphasized Lucina's want to have a child with the king by questioning her about the couple's capacity to abstain for 2 months. Lucina acknowledged and clarified that her body required improved wellness. Fuka argued that the power of the earth was the reason Lucina's human body was feeble. He continued by saying that Lucina's health issues will be resolved when the king's kid was born because the fire's energy would balance out her earthly energy. Startled, Lucina immediately got up, concerned about what would happen to her life. Fuka disclosed that she would be completely protected from the fire energy of the unborn child throughout her pregnancy, meaning she would not be able to employ her healing abilities. When Lucina interrogated Fuka about whether she would recover her abilities after giving birth, he answered in the positive. Lucina was furious with Fwa for failing to notify her sooner. Fwa thoughtlessly said that Lucina hadn't posed the topic right away. With haste, Lucina informed the king that she may use her healing abilities to have a child. Han received the medication that the priest had prepared in the meantime from the servants. After questioning the second servant about why there were flowers in his room, Han discovered that Tuan had given the order to decorate since Lucina had been coming over so often. Han thought the concept was good. He stroked the flowers in the hopes that Lucina would find them meaningful after taking his prescription promptly to subdue his fire energy. The guards brought Lucina to her feet, and she smiled as she walked into her king's chamber, prepared to reveal something significant. But Han seized Lucina's arms firmly, hurting her, and gave her a firm kiss. Lucina recoiled instinctively, perplexed by Akin's unusual condition. He said he didn't feel good today and recommended they sleep apart. Lucina pulled away, not quite understanding why this abrupt separation had occurred. Han, on the other hand, wondered whether this was a response to the prosperous time that would come in 2 months. He was overcome with doubts and regretted his actions. Meanwhile, back in the secondary palace, Lucina lamented that she hadn't been able to comprehend Akin completely, and expressed worry about his strange conduct. Because of the prince's condition, I'm spreading the news. When Titi saw Lucina was having trouble falling asleep, she recommended a trip to the hot springs for a change of pace. When she got there, Lucina breathed while submerging herself underwater. She was commended by Titi for being able to remain underwater. Han saw Lucina beaming and grinning at the same moment as he was making his way to the hot springs to cool down. She was so charming that he was unable to contain his blushes in the face of her enhanced attractiveness from her grin. But Han was surrounded by smoke rising from a candle, which gave him hallucinations. Jila clarified that every expression of love made by this candle produced delusions. These delusions, feeble and transient at first, became more intense with time. Lost in his delusions, Han saw Lucina grinning next Jillet. Lucina was confused and alarmed as Han hurriedly approached her out of rage. Hesitant, he rationalized his hurried approach by saying he was worried she could fall into the river. Lucina, puzzled but relieved, inquired as to his well-being. Akin, who was obviously fatigued, claimed to be a little sleepy and promised that things will get better after taking a hot spring bath. Savoring the occasion, Lucina broke the news to Han that she could have a child without facing any repercussions. Han then asked Titi to accompany Lucina back to her chamber in the secondary palace, delaying the conversation. Lost in his thoughts, Han was perplexed as to why, in Lucina's presence, he had responded this way. He clenched his hands, wondering if he was going crazy. Gazing at the scene through the candle from a distance, Jillet surmised that soon Han would feel nothing but hate for Lucina. He continued by saying that Han would eventually lose interest in her if he rejected her on his own. He foresaw that Lucina would come to him and they would leave the palace together once she became disillusioned with Han. Han so went up to the priest and confided that he wasn't feeling well physically.